Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the latest in Ring of Honor Straight Shootin' series. We are joined today by an icon here in the wrestling business, the one and only Mick Foley. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Hey, it's nice to be right here in a hotel room, the Marriott in Long Island.
People are supposed to think that we have a fancy set here.
Oh, no, we're in a hotel room. Not only are we in a hotel room, but I actually asked you guys if we could keep the room so I could stay here. For my 3-year-old, this is Disney World. Staying in a hotel room is the greatest thing in the world. So, dual purpose hotel room.
All right, we will pick things up where your second book left off as far as your in-ring activity goes.
Okay.
You mentioned that you wanted to do the commissioner stint in 2000. You thought that it would be something fun to do. Was it as fun as that you hoped it would be?
It was more fun. I mean, I could argue that it was the greatest time of my wrestling career. It was great. I mean, I didn't have to. I showed up not too late, but I didn't have to show up nearly as early as the other guys. I never had to change my clothes. I think I only got physically involved once, and I was able to leave as soon as I was done, and I was able to have a lot of fun. And as ridiculous as it sounds, I took my goal of trying to make wrestling a little bit more fun for the audience. I took it very seriously, and I thought that the period of the Helmsley McMahon era had been a great period, but it had gone on a long time, and that a change was needed. And I kind of felt like I was the face of that new time period, and I liked it.
Yeah. What were some of your favorite moments in 2000 as commissioner?
Well, undoubtedly the Credgley moments, the Christian Edge Foley moments, I think were my favorite. I even felt strongly enough about them to put them on the the Hard Knocks and Cheap Pops DVD. It was just a lot of fun. It wasn't like I didn't think I was going to have great chemistry with those guys, but from the very first video we did, or video segment, it was clear that we were on to something. And even things as ridiculous as Christian trying to cut weight so he can wrestle for the light heavyweight championship, and exercising in Kurt Angle's chicken outfit. I don't know if the fans remember that, but when we get together, we'll even reminisce fondly about it, about Kurt Angle showing up in the useless cameo, saying, "Hey, that's my chicken suit." So it was a lot of fun. I think those were my favorite moments.
Okay. What was your opinion of the writing team at this time?
Writing team was Jamie, can't remember Jamie's last name, Brian Gewirtz, and I'm not sure if Tommy Blancha was still there. I always liked the writing team. I mean, I know a lot of people are hard on the writers, but I think it's a difficult job, and even guys who are really creative tend to be only creative for themselves. It's hard to really put yourself in the shoes of another wrestler and come up with great stuff for them, and a lot of times it doesn't happen. But at that time, I thought we were on a roll. 2000, Benoit kind of got a short-lived major push, and like I said, that's an example of one of the guys that was coming into his own, and I think they made it a little bit more fun. And in my case, they would give me bullet points because they knew that I liked to do my own stuff. I can't remember off the top of my head most of the programs, but by all indications, business was really strong back then, and I think the writing had something to do with it. Timing was great. I mean, at that time, you just had to put WWE on the marquee. Actually, I think back then you put WWF on the marquee, and buildings were selling out without a card even being announced. So the writing team benefited from the timing and from the whole industry being hot, but I thought they were really good.
You mentioned they would give you bullet points. So did you end up writing most of your own promos?
Well, I wouldn't write promos. I would think about them and let them come out naturally, which is the way I think good promos do come out. The only times I was scripted, when I was Dude Love, Vince Russo wrote a script, and it came across. This was in Long Island, and I didn't realize. This is when they first started, bringing in the scripted interviews. I didn't realize that I could say, "Hey, I don't feel comfortable doing this." But after a couple of scripted promos, I did ask, if I could specifically do it my own way. There was only one other case where Vince apparently had specifically written something, and when I found out he had written it, I opted not to ask if I could change it. And that was back when I was wrestling Undertaker with Paul Bearer as my manager.
Okay. Did you ever go to the writing team with any ideas that they refused?
Oh, yeah.
Speaking of just 2000.
I'm sure I did. Oh, in 2000? Well,
Yeah.
in 2000 really wasn't my, wasn't my position to come up with angles for the other guys. I mean, I felt like my job was to try to get the angles over. I mean, some people would say my job was to, be funny out there, but I really felt my job was to create a likable character who, when made to, could get upset and therefore get the angles over. I thought that was something about the job that people didn't fully appreciate. That when it was time to get the angles over, I thought I was pretty good at it. And I had ideas, that we could shot down, but not major angles. I remember at that time, it was hard when we were heads up with, or head to head with WCW to get more than a minute of vignette time. And there were times when I would fight with those guys because we'd go like a minute 20, and it'd be really good stuff, and we were told, no, it's got to go a minute. That Vince gets upset. He thinks people are going to turn off the set, and I think they need to go back to remembering that, because I think WWE has gotten a little sloppy without the competition, in that sometimes the vignettes can go on forever. And off the top of my head, I'm thinking of the Eddie Guerrero 5-minute karaoke version of Shameless, which never would have seen the light of day if WCW was on the air. Not that Eddie wasn't a good, bad karaoke singer, but it was just a little too long.
Do you think it's a matter of, to kind of switching topic a little bit, that Vince really needs that competition to push them, and maybe they get a little complacent when they don't have it, or if they're still seeing a fat paycheck, they're not so much concerned with the rest of the product?
No, I do think it's the first thing. I think it's just human nature that everybody needs competition to push them. Certainly, if you had an Olympic sprinter out there by himself, he would not be nearly as fast as when there were other people chasing him. So I do think the lack of competition hurt the show, and there was a sense of complacency that did hurt the program.
Going back to 2000, you had Deborah as your assistant.
Yes.
How did you like working with her? And was it true that you pushed to have Midian as your assistant?
I did like working with Deborah, but Midian was that was an angle. I don't know if you call that an angle that was shot down. And the premise of this, and I'm still convinced this would have been the greatest segment of all time, was that I was going to find out, get some bad news, and demand to call, demand to talk to Vince McMahon. I was going to make my way out to the payphone, and find that I was without a quarter. And then I was going to say, hey, Midian, can you lend me a quarter? And he says, sure, there's one right here in my pouch. And I was going to reach back, and I'd say, hey, I just need one, not a whole roll of them. And Midian was going to say, that's not my pouch. That would have been the greatest segment of all time. And as it was, we did something where, now this wouldn't have been able to show up on DVD bloopers, but sometimes you do things just to amuse yourself. And so there was a deal where I was talking to Midian, and I was doing some writing, and then I dropped my paper, and he goes, hold on, I'll get that. And when he bent over, I was supposed to, oh God, and that's the one that made the cut. But the one that got lost in the editing room floors when he bent over, and I went, oh, I could eat that thing for hours. And but I did. I would have loved to work the naked Midian character. The fact that my kids loved him, they thought that was the greatest thing in the world, and I think that was one of the two funniest things I've ever seen in my life. Was the debut of Naked Midian, where all the guys were gathered around the monitor just waiting. Because when I heard that, I was like, what's everyone gathered around for? It was like a dark match. And Undertaker said, Midian's new character. And what's that? He's Naked Midian. Like, debut of naked character. So obviously it was going to be short-lived. It never really had main event potential. But when he came out of the crowd with that stupid pouch on and did the little dance, I was laughing so hard that my back hurt. And the other funniest thing I have ever seen is Ivory's imitation of a turtle. So I had her do it for Linda McMahon at the Democratic Convention, and I'm not sure Linda thought it as funny as I did, but I think she appreciated it.
What's her imitation of a turtle?
I can't do justice to it. It's just her face takes on a really eerie resemblance to a turtle. It's amazing. And then, and I'm the trainer, so I've got to provide a little bit of dialogue, and then I give her the piece of lettuce, end up smacking her on the head, and her head retreats into its shell. It's really good.
Right, and that's then as commissioner, you did a series of angles with Steve Austin where he gave you the stunner. What was your memories of those angles?
Yeah, that was an example of the commissioner getting serious, and I'm just trying to think in my head of what was on the line there. This is where Austin had been suspended indefinitely.
Yeah, and I think that the culmination was that Rikushi turned out to be the one that took out Austin.
Yeah, that's right, because I was saying that Austin, Austin was trying to create his own brand of justice, right? Yeah, okay, it's coming back to me now. I thought that was good stuff, I mean, you could say, well, in real life, wouldn't someone, actually like bring the police into this thing, instead of a commissioner conducting his own investigation? But I thought it was good TV, and I thought, we got across the story that it hurt me to have to suspend him, because he's somebody I was close to. I do remember that. Anytime we were in an angle with Steve, anytime I was, to speak for myself, it's a thrill, Especially I go back to thinking when I was, Mankind as a heel, and he was just so red hot as a wrestler. Like those were moments that I could have never dreamed about, because I never could have conceived that I'd be wrestling somebody who was that hot, with wrestling being that big, and literally everything you did, was getting a huge response. So anytime you have a chance to do something with Steve, it's a pleasure.
Did you and Steve always get along, or were there any times that you butted heads over how the
I think we're not as close as people think. I know somebody speculated that I got in, his first title, that I was his first opponent after he won the title, because, he was my bro. And certainly I like him, I consider him a friend, but I don't think we're as close as people think. And there were a couple times, when we butted heads. He was not particularly fond of Savio Vega bringing in the barbed wire and wrapping me up in I think it was an 8-man tag team match from '98. And Steve pulled me aside, and this is the day after Mania. I think it was the day after Mania. He said, "Hey, we're, he goes, you consider me a straight shooter, right?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, let me talk to you." He pulled me over, and I'm trying to think, what did I know I didn't say anything that was, offensive to him. He hated the WrestleMania match we had, the 5-man match. He hated it. He said, I had gone from being so intense and having this tremendous grudge to like looking like the Rock's sidekick, And I disagreed with him on the part after the match, where I gave the reaction as if, I just let down everybody, I disagreed with him on that. I thought the reaction was fine. I think his character, he would have fired up on the guy and made a heck of a comeback. And at one time, that was the plan, and I specifically said, hey, look, usually when a guy fires up a comeback, it's so the fans don't remember they just lost the match. I said, the most important thing about this is in dealing with the writers, the most important thing about this match is that everybody specifically remember that I lost the match, or more importantly, that Randy Orton won the match. So I disagreed with him on that. But I really respected the honesty. I mean, in this business, people are so apt to just pat you on the back and tell you everything you do is great. So for a guy like that to, he was a little more serious about it than he needed to be. But he really felt strongly that I dropped the ball. And when I got to thinking about it, I realized I did too. I mean, I think on some level I knew it already, but he really brought that point home. And so that was among the incentives I had to really to really reestablish myself at Backlash.
Okay. While we're on the topic of that, I was going to cover it a little later, but
Sure.
while we're on the topic, how do you feel that you dropped the ball and that thing?
You know what? I had an interview in mind, and I know we're jumping all over the place. And when Vince convinced me that my go-home interview would be better done in a room by myself, sitting in a rocking chair, as opposed to being live, I realized I had the room to do something a little more creative and imaginative, and that's where I ended up coming up with the Barbie idea. And I was really, in the end, his decision was the right decision, because I think it was a very memorable interview. And anytime you're alone and not in front of the crowd, you have the ability to kind of get a little deeper into the storytelling, where you're not waiting on an audience pop every 10 seconds. And I think over the past few years, ironically, because wrestling is not as hot as it was, you've lost a lot of the bandwagon jumpers who need to cheer every 10 seconds. And so while we may not have as many fans left, you're more likely to have the fan who's willing to listen a little bit. So in that case, I was actually better served by the idea that there's not quite as many wrestling fans. But had I not done that, I would have given an interview talking about how, and this is legit, you know, I didn't know how I was going to come across in that match. And everything, in talking about WrestleMania, everything that I had prepared myself for was the angles, and the intensity, and the interviews. I hadn't really thought about the match that much, you know, and it wasn't my match. You know, you've got guys, you know, I mean, you know, Flair with a definite idea of what, you know, of what he thinks wrestling is. The Rock's got to establish himself, his first time back in a year, and then you had me there, you know, and it couldn't be a straight up anything goes grudge match, but we could have kept it a little closer to that, and that's my fault, because I didn't step up and I didn't say, hey, this is what this match needs to be. And it's not like I was overruled and all that. I wanted to make people happy. I didn't want to create waves, and at the same time, I was thrilled to be there. You know, I mean, I lost sight of the goal, and I went out about a minute before we were announced. We were listening to Evolution's music, and I turned to The Rock and I said, hey, if I get lost out there, you know, just kind of help me out. And I remember, you know, I don't think God particularly cares that much about sports entertainment, but on rare occasions, you know, I'll say a little prayer, and often I'll do it for safety. But in this case, it was just like, oh, please don't let me embarrass myself out there. So my promo would have been done along the lines that, hey, you know, that's like Michael Jordan taking the last second shot and saying, well, please let me hit the rim. You know what I mean? Or Barry Bonds getting up at the bases loaded and saying, please let me make contact, you know. I mean, I've struck out a lot of times, but I could always say that I, you know, always was looking to hit the home run, and here it was like I was looking for a single, you know, like that shouldn't have been good enough. You know, and we didn't stink up the place. You know, we had a good match, and a lot of people would say, well, imagining a lot of people would say, are you, you know, do you feel like Flair overshadowed you by, you know, stealing the match? I'd say, thank goodness he stole the match, you know, because I want that match to be remembered as something being decent. Because it's up to me and my performance, it would not have been decent. I thought Rock was excellent. I thought Flair was really, it was great. I mean, it was a pleasure just to watch the passion he had. And I told him that, you know, after the match. I said, I'd never seen you up close. I said, man, it was really an honor to see, you know, to see the love you bring to the business. And Randy and Batista did their roles, but I dropped the ball.
Okay. Was it more of you're just going into the match kind of timid, where you're looking not to embarrass yourself?
Yeah, I think so. You know, it's all that was my goal, was not to tear the house down, and there have not been very many occasions where that was true. I mean, I always wanted to tear it down, especially on an occasion like this. And I've always been better in singles matches, dating back, you know, to like high school athletics, where, man, if I was playing one-on-one in basketball, I was pretty good. But you put 4 other guys in the court, and I would tend to sink back and want to put up 20-footers. And in wrestling, I mean, even back to when gorgeous Gary Young was my partner, you know, when I'd be on the sidelines, you know, hoping Gary would, you know, would really excel. I just tended to retreat a little bit in a tag team situation, and even, you know, even when things really got going, I had to convince myself that, hey, you know, I got to go in and make my contribution, not just my contribution, but I've got to really do my part to making this as good a match as possible. And, you know, WrestleMania, that wasn't the case. I was glad to see that The Rock, you know, was making the spirited comeback, and that Flair was doing the most ridiculous people's elbow of all time, because that was stuff that was covering up for the fact that I, you know, was not there.
Who put together that WrestleMania match?
That was, you know, it was like, you know, 3 different people putting it together, all putting in their own ideas. And don't get me wrong, it wasn't like there was conflict there. And I got points across that I wanted to make, but the attitude once the match started was that, hey, this is a great, you know, WrestleMania, look at this crowd. All that hatred, you know, that the angle had been built on just kind of disappeared. And I specifically remembered when I hung Randy Orton upside down and did the flying headbutt, which I hadn't done in years. You know, I hadn't done anything in years, but I hadn't gone to that even in my last few years as an active wrestler. As I was tagging The Rock in, I was cognizant of the fact that there's no way I should be tagging anybody in when Randy Orton's in the ring with me. You know what I mean? It's like that gear should have been there to you know, to suspend disbelief and make people think that I couldn't stand this guy. And I realized that I was tagging out. I'm screwing this match up, and I tagged out anyway. Part of it was the conditioning just wasn't there. No matter how hard you work out, and I did work out hard, and I was proud of the fact that at that point I think I'd lost 50 pounds, and I went on to lose another 10 before Backlash. Obviously that didn't come without some hard work and sacrifice, but you can't duplicate the wrestling process. You know, what you go through in the ring can't be duplicated by a Stairmaster or a bicycle. And I just was not in ring shape.
Okay. You mentioned that Vince convinced you to do a promo alone in the room. What exactly did he do to convince you?
I remember getting the phone call when it was a conference call with Vince and Brian Gewirtz, and I was dropping my son off at his Little League practice, so I actually had the conversation in the parking lot at the athletic fields. And I don't remember what brought it on, but I think I asked for live interview time, and then Vince said, well, I was thinking along the lines of something, in a room where it's dark, and he brought up the rocking chair. And I said I didn't think people would listen for 6 or 7 minutes, and he thought they would. So, like I said, that kind of gave me the chance to think of something a little bit creative and come up with the whole, Barbie thing. And
so he sold you on the creativity.
Yeah. He sometimes Vince was really good at convincing me that I was better than I thought I was, and that people had more faith in me than I thought they did. And I think Vince has a faith in the wrestling fans' intelligence sometimes that some of the wrestlers don't. But in the end, that decision was a really good one. But I will say the decision to have me come out after that promo and be part of saving Shelton Benjamin was the wrong decision. The decision to have me hand my back to Johnny Nitro was the wrong decision. And I did fight against those. And I really regret that I didn't fight hard enough, because in the end, there's no way after giving that promo that I should have been, okay, here you go, here's the bat, and then getting beaten up. Really, I think what I was effective at in that interview is getting across the point that I can be, on occasion, a very dangerous person. And to take me out of that role as a dangerous person and make me look like just another guy was counterproductive, as was, I believe, the decision to put me in the 8-man match. Even though it was a great match, I had to kind of justify my being in there by saying to the audience, hey, you're not going to see the Mick Foley that you'll see on Sunday. And you shouldn't really have to do that. I think it should have been a given that, that Mick Foley or Cactus Jack the fans were going to see was going to be, a very different performer and a very dangerous person. And so on those two occasions, I really wish I'd had my way and wish I'd fought for it harder. And it turned out that Brian Gewirtz, he came up with the out for me, a week too late. He said, what we should have done is just said this interview is from an undisclosed location, so that people wouldn't say, hey, why is Mick not saving Shelton Benjamin? What kind of guy is he if he's not going to stand up for Shelton? But all things considered, those are minor points, and I was very happy with the build-up and loved the video they did. I mean, they did a video that, to me, gave me chills. And I imagine, with several million people looking on, that there had to have been at least a couple million chills, when that... and I had to go to Vince and ask for the video, and he was like, Mick, I don't think... You want to do my Vince for you? Mick, I don't think that there's any footage that can compete with the words you just spoke. And I said, Vince, you know what? I don't think the fans realize that I actually got any offense in during my career. I said, we actually have footage showing me doing some impressive stuff, and I don't think people know that that's in my past. And he thought about it, and they put together that great video.
Okay. Jumping back to 2000.
Sure.
When you were told that you were going to reveal that it was Rikushi who ran over Austin, did you think it was going to be a letdown, or did you say, how am I going to make this work, or anything like that?
No, I really liked it. That was, I think that was Stephanie McMahon's first, real contribution as the head of the writing team, and I told her how proud I was of her. I thought it was really good storytelling, and and in retrospect, looking back, there were a couple cracks in the logic, but I think we made it out to be a pretty good deal. I don't remember offhand if the follow-through was good, but being in the ring, I did not get the feeling that it was a big letdown, and that it did kind of make some sense.
Okay, you then went into a series of angles with Vince McMahon over the dangers of the Hell in a Cell match.
Yeah.
What was your opinion of that series of angles?
I thought they were very good. I personally thought that they should have taken a little better care of me on the payoff for the Hell in a Cell, because I thought almost like I was an extra member, because they certainly were building that up in great part on my past in the cell. But I enjoyed being part of that, and there's another situation where I was serious as the commissioner, and I thought that it got the angle over pretty well, and I think I don't know the buy rate offhand, but I think it was a good buy rate, and I like to think that putting me in charge to some degree with the promotion of it helped.
Then you did the angle after the Hell in a Cell where you were supposed to resign and you tore up the resignation. What was your thoughts on that angle?
I don't even remember all these things. And that was the one where Austin came to my aid,
yep,
right?
That's where he came out.
Yeah.
And gave
You know what? I think what I remember most vividly about that is that Vince was trying to convince me why I should resign, and Vince said, "Think about your wife. Think about Colette. She's pregnant, Mick. She has your child." And at that moment, I was thinking, I wish he hadn't said that, because I had felt that through my own fault, really, that my two kids, Dewey and Noel, had become more involved in wrestling than I wanted them to, including being part of Beyond the Mat, and that maybe my kids shouldn't have been as public a faces as they were, and I was trying to keep that secret. And so Vince asked me, "You don't mind that I brought that up, did you?" And I said, "Well, I was trying to keep it a secret." Meanwhile, I had guys who were good friends of mine, like Edge, coming up and going, "Oh, Colette's pregnant, that's great. When'd she do?" I was like, "In 2 weeks," so it was something I was trying to keep private, and Vince screwed it up for me.
Okay. How were you getting along with Vince at this point?
At that point, I think we got along great. Like I said, I would have issues every now and then, thinking, the payoff specifically about Hell in a Cell could have been better. There's one thing or two things I regret about my relationship with Vince is, I think once the XFL started, and once I was fired on TV, and I was fired to show you what kind of a guy Vince is. He fired me so I could go home and and spend more time with my family and be there, while my little Mick was growing up. I wish I'd kept in better touch with Vince, because it was expected I would come back to do the big match with him, and we had such great history, and I did tell him I'd do the match. So I do feel like I went back on my word. I wish I'd kept in better touch, because I could have told him in what way I thought I should return. As it was, they wanted me to come back and demand my job back and then challenge Vince to a match. And I thought, that sounds like being a baby to me. It's his company. He can hire and fire whoever he wants. I should have, instead of dropping out and saying I don't want to wrestle, maybe I should have gone and tried to work out a better way of returning. And that's at least in good part my fault, because I was not on top of things. So in retrospect, I wish that I had done that match with Vince, because I think it would have been not a great match per se, but it would have been something fans would have really wanted. I was aware of the idea that I might look like like a hypocrite by making the Foley is Good book so much about the decision to retire, and then having a match before the book even came out. But I probably would have made close to the payoff for WrestleMania probably would have been close to what I made on the book anyway, and I don't think that many fans would have looked down on me for it. I think most fans would have liked it, and I think to some degree I became the boy who cried wolf after that, because I came back in May of 2001 and told Vince, "Hey, look, this is important to me, and if you want me to do a match to support this, I will." And for some reason, the idea of me wrestling Vince got switched to me wrestling William Regal. Another regret I have, I've said this to Regal personally, is that I pretty much cost him the commissioner job. They replaced him, and he was doing a great job as commissioner, I thought. And they replaced him with me, and then I bailed out on the prospective Regal Foley match. And I'll be honest, I just thought, hey, I have no idea what I'll make for this. And I thought that in Vince's mind, when payoffs were due, that would not be considered a top match, and that I would have had my comeback match for a very minimal amount of money. So I'll publicly apologize to William Regal for dropping out of that, for costing him his commissioner job. And again, I think, up until I did this match at this past WrestleMania, in some ways I was the boy who cried wolf to Vince.
I was going to ask you about the Regal and Vince matches. So the main reason those didn't happen is because of the book, and also because you thought that maybe the payoff wouldn't be what you wanted it to be?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I thought, when they shifted it from Vince to Regal, I at that point I didn't think I could come up and say, hey, I need some type of guarantee for this. But I did feel like my first match back was a big deal, and I had, in my own defense, I'd been surprised on several occasions at how low some of the payoffs were. And there was a big disparity between a main event payoff and even a semi-main event payoff, and then there's a big drop from there. And I did think that some matches that were billed as semi-main events that did not pay that well, I thought that was part of the reason why I bailed out, So it's unfortunate, that's one of the things that led to my my departure on Vince's plane. But I think deep down he always liked me and always respected me, and I think that was mutual.
Is it true that they wanted you to do a 10-man tag somewhere in there too?
Yeah, that was true. That was with the WCW Invasion, WCW ECW Invasion, and I remember JR telling me that, and I can't remember offhand if I thought the match wasn't promoted well enough, but I did think that on short notice like that, it was short notice, that I wouldn't be capable of coming up with much of a performance, and I was told that it didn't matter, there'd be 4 other guys there, and it was as a point of personal pride. I told JR, he said, you don't have to be the old Mick Foley or the old Cactus Jack, and I said, I really don't want to have a match unless I can be that guy. So in a strange way, I was inspired by Dee Snider of Twisted Sister. I went to see Dee perform with Bent Brother. They were getting ready for their reunion tour, so they're doing a club show. And I'd known Dee, he's a pretty good friend of mine, and I don't have many famous friends, so aside from him and Kevin James, I'm pretty much out of famous friends. But I went to see him, and I was ready to be disappointed. I thought, it's going to be kind of sad to see this guy in his upper 40s trying to recapture his glory days. And he came out, he had, such passion and charisma, and I remember thinking, I'm not going back to wrestling unless I can be that good at what I do. And so I really made up my mind that would be the case, and that's what I had in mind when I, finally decided to do the Mania thing. And although I didn't accomplish that goal at Mania, I do think I accomplished it at Backlash.
Okay. All right, then at the end of 2000, you ended up leaving WWF, and then you came back with the angle that Linda McMahon brought you back as you signed all this paperwork with Tacoma. What did you think of that whole scenario? Oh,
that was my idea. I thought more could have been done with it. I do. I think I wanted to be driving Vince crazy, and I don't think that really got across. I mean, it seemed like it was a minor annoyance to him. I think what I wanted was for Vince to become so obsessed with me and this little weird control I had over him that he would bring me back. He would demand me coming back. I know that sounds like a minor point, but to me there's a big difference when it comes to drawing money between the babyface saying, I want to come back, and being dragged out of retirement. So I know might seem a little weird that, all right, you're willing to break your real life word of retirement as long as it makes sense in a fictional storyline. But for some reason that is important to me, that I would come back as long as I was dragged back. And that's ultimately what ended up happening with the Randy Orton thing.
Okay. You did the referee thing for the Shane and Vince match at WrestleMania 17. What's your memories of that?
I thought they had a really good match, and I'll tell you what, I really enjoyed being part of that WrestleMania because there was no pressure whatsoever being part of it, and I kind of got the benefit of being out there and hearing the 60,000 people without having the pressure of having to perform. So it was good to be like a beloved part of the WWE family and go and do the things associated with WrestleMania without worrying about living up to the hype, So I thought they had a very good match, and I was glad to be part of it. And I do think, I'll go on record as saying, when Vince was supposed to hit me in the back and ended up cracking me the top part of the head with a chair, maybe not on a conscious level, but I think there was some payback there for bailing out of the match to begin with. Because the Shane Vince thing was really good and it was well done, but I do think that if we had gone ahead with the Foley McMahon match, with the great story we had, the backstory, that it would have been even more important. And the shame of it is, it's hard to go back there now, because the stuff we did was 5 and 6 years ago. I mean, all the great, Mankind, McMahon vignettes where, I love Vince and he couldn't stand me. That would have been a perfect time to capitalize on it, and I didn't do it.
So the Shane Vince match was really a backup for you versus Vince?
Yeah, and it was a good backup. I mean, I think it was very well done, and I think I think this is the time frame. I remember being called into the WWE sales office in New York, and that's where we did the vignette with me and Linda, where we cut the grapefruits in half. And I think that led to, in some way, to Shane taking on Vince. So, yeah, like I said, it was a good backup. It was a very good match, but I think if we stuck with the Foley McMahon plan, I would have never gone through the rough times emotionally with them that we went through.
Was the second book coming out, was that part of the reason you came back then, or the main motivation for coming back?
Yeah, that was when I came back in May of 2001. I might be messing up my dates here now. Yeah, I came back, and that's when I had the power over Vince with these things. But I think we're talking about the March WrestleMania. So by that point, I think there already had been some damage done to the relationship. So they let me promote the book, and it was their book, so they benefited from it also. But I don't think things were ever the same.
Well, was it just mainly because you didn't do that match with Vince? Was that?
Well, that was a small part of it, but there was also the feeling, in my feeling, that I had done as much. I'd actually done more in the wrestling world than I ever thought I could, and there were other things I wanted to do. And I wasn't. I mean, it's not all about money in wrestling, but I was doing a lot of appearances, especially at the World, for them, and they were non-paid appearances, and they were getting in the way of other things I wanted to do. For example, I couldn't commit to any kind of charitable groups because I was like a doctor on call. I never knew when I'd have to be in Sioux City, Iowa, on a day's notice. So it was hard to make some commitments, and those type of things were important to me. And a lot of bad feelings came about, believe it or not, over the novel. I wanted to do that novel on my own, and they felt like it should be a WWE project, and there should have been a little more give and take in there. And I look back on it now, and I think, what would it have hurt to have made it a WWE novel? It wasn't like the book set the literary world on fire anyway, certainly not from a sales perspective, but it was really important to me to not have that label on the book, the WWE label. And I think everybody at some point wants to do something on their own, and I wish they'd been more like a record company that realizes that Mick Jagger wants to do a solo album, but that doesn't mean he's leaving the Stones. So I thought they could have been a little more accommodating on that, but in the end it turned out nice, and they gave it a little plug on there, and I think when this next novel comes out that they'll be very agreeable to doing something similar.
You came back in October 2001 as commissioner. Well,
yeah.
What made you return at that time?
Man. I don't know offhand. But by that time we'd already had our. That was when the match with Regal was supposed to take place.
Okay.
And things were going bad by that point. Not over the novel, but because of all things, the Halloween book. I loved the Halloween book, but I had the author, the illustrator, was a very good friend of mine, and man, they were making it difficult on her, and I just thought they could have been a little better to her. And my feeling is, if you're going to make my life difficult, that's one thing, but to make life difficult on a friend of mine who I brought into the project was something that I was not very fond of. It seems so ridiculous now, but I mean, it really got to the point where I asked the Today Show to bar WWE, employees from the building. And I had asked for my release in the summer of 2001, and this is got to be a very heated conversation with me and Vince. Got to involve a lot of yelling. And even though it wasn't an enjoyable conversation being part of, I look at that as like one of the great moments in my life, because I realized that once you can go toe-to-toe with Vince McMahon verbally and be in his office and be yelling at this larger-than-life figure who you grew up, if not idolizing, at least, holding in awe, that, the rest of life was easy. So, from a public speaking standpoint, I would be willing to debate foreign policy with George W. Bush, and I think I would win. There's nobody who intimidates me because I've spoken up to Vince McMahon. And I think in a weird way, he admires that. I think he likes me on a personal basis, a great deal. But I do know that after I had them banned from the Today Show, that JR, I got a call. This is when I went to Long Island. I was still officially the commissioner, but I didn't make an appearance in Long Island. And JR was like, yeah, I heard about the Today Show. And I said, yeah, that hasn't been done before. He's like, no, I can't say that it has. And JR said that he got the feeling that if we were to part ways now, meaning then, that things were not, they were not so bad that they couldn't be repaired. But if I were to stay longer, we might reach that point where things could not be put back together. So I'm really grateful that they let me out of that contract. I had a great year away from them, and it really and I feel like I needed to be away from them for a long time. And I came back June of 2000.
The Nash Hall or the Nash Triple H Hall.
2003. Yeah, so it had been 18 months away, and it was good for me. I hope it was good for them.
What were Vince's main arguments in that office that day? What was his side of the whole thing?
Oh man, now you guys are getting me to the point where I don't know if I should speak up. You guys aren't paying me for this, but I can make a lot more money with Vince than I can with you guys. There was a point where he said that you have to look at your wrestlers and investments, and I said, Vince, I think you've gotten a pretty good return on this investment. And he sort of granted me that point, and he talked about what they had done for me, and then I said, Vince, look, granted you guys have done a lot for me, but I also think that I've done a lot for you. And if it was all about the machine being behind me, then my most over personality would not have been that as Mick Foley commissioner. And then Vince said, I hate to disagree with you, but your most over personality was Dude Love. And they went, so by the point that comment came up, it was, I believe that Vince likes me a great deal personally. He may be opposed to a lot of the things, that I believe in, from a wrestling perspective or even a political perspective. But I will always believe that if he were to ask to compile his 10 favorite WWE superstars as people, that I'd be up there on that list. And I told Vince that I hold him in the same regard that I do the presidents. He's not a perfect guy, but I think he's a unique guy and someone that I definitely respect, and I like him on a personal basis. He's a hard guy not to like him, and I think most people who speak really badly of him don't know him very well.
Was the basic gist of everything was you wanted your artistic freedom with those books, and they wanted you to be part of the WWF machine?
That was a lot of it. It's, like I said, it seems ridiculous. Or I don't know if it was a lot of it. It was part of it, but the fact that that I wanted to go a year early. I think that was hard for them to think that someone didn't want them in their lives, But I'm glad it worked out well. Who knows? Maybe after this video airs, it won't have worked out well. But I will always consider them, to be like like family to me. It doesn't mean I always like them. Doesn't mean I always agree with them. But I will always, consider them to be close to me.
What did you think of the Alliance versus WWE angle?
Refresh my memory.
Where ECW and WCW.
Oh yeah. Hey, it made for really exciting TV for a few weeks. Obviously, they could have done better with it. I remember thinking they dropped the ball. You know, maybe Vince shouldn't have brought up names that he couldn't come up with. But I do think that you know, there was the indication that the public was interested because TV ratings went up, and that first pay-per-view did outstanding numbers, and they for some reason they couldn't keep the momentum going.
Did you ever push for guys like DDP or Dreamer to do more in the angle, or did you think they could have done more?
Yeah, sure. When I was asked by Kevin Kelly. I don't know if it was Bite This or not, and he said, "Man, Mick, I'm trying to think in a time frame. This is 2000. Was this 2002 when they came in? July of 2002.
It was 2001.
That was 2001. Okay, that's July 2001. Okay, and I didn't end up leaving until November of 2001. Okay."
Yep.
So he asked me, he said, "Mick, it's obvious, this is around October, right before I left, you know." He said, "It's obvious something's missing from the TV, and we want to know what you think." And I said, "Well, Kevin, I'm going to say some things that people aren't going to be happy with." And he said, "Well, no, we asked you, we want your opinion." I said, "Well, I do know that at the last pay-per-view, I was sitting around watching the show on the monitor, and I don't remember if this is October or November, but it was in that time period. And I said, I remember sitting there watching it with a lot of guys who I had worked with and who had been main event guys, and they were out of the loop. And I specifically mentioned guys like Dreamer and guys like Raven. And I do think, you know, that it is a sad statement that guys who are already over, who had proved they could get over, I mean, with Paulie's help, but also with a lot of hard work and talent, were being left out of the loop. You know, a guy like Al Snow, for example, especially on the heels of Tough Enough. And I'm saying this publicly. I told Al, I said this, and he refused to believe I put him over. I said, you had a guy that the fans, new fans also, liked and believed in. Like, he came across like a genuinely nice person who certainly knew his wrestling and could handle himself. I mean, when you want to talk about legitimate tough guys, Al Snow, I don't want to say he's right at the top of the list, but he's certainly on that list, you know. Not where I am on that, but he's on the list, and I thought that they missed the boat on him. So there were situations where guys weren't being pushed that I thought should be, and I don't know if I went to the battle, although I don't went to bat for them, although I don't doubt that I did. And in the case of Diamond Dallas Page, man, that was sad, you know, because he was a guy. You know, who had a track record, and it's out there on videotape for anyone who wants to see it, out there on DVD in some cases. A guy who could work. Some people would say, hey, he set his matches up, and my reply is, what does it matter? You know, what matters is what comes across in the ring. And I thought he had proven that he could come up with good matches. You know, part of it was his fault. He was trying to make everyone happy. He was never a big bump guy, and he was trying to become at age 45 a big bump guy, and his bumps ended up being a little too theatrical. But you know, to cast him aside and say he couldn't work when he proved that he could, to me was unfair.
Now, the night before the airplane promo with Vince was Survivor Series, which you were at the restaurant for some reason. What were you angry about that, or why?
Well, I did think I was becoming the standard restaurant guy. I thought that, you know, they were being a little short-sighted, because in my own defense, I thought that I was a guy who could come and make an impact. But I can't make an impact, or I couldn't make an impact if I was on the show every week. You know, so as long as I wasn't being paid, I would have liked to have been off, only because I could have come back, bam, with impact. I had a little controversy over not showing up at the Raw 500th episode or 10-year reunion, and I was invited, and it caused some hard feelings. But again, my decision was based on the fact that for fans to see me after a year in a situation where I wasn't going to really add to the show, I wasn't going to help anyone get over or draw money, was counterproductive. And B, you know, I was around 330 at that time, and I did feel like when I did show up, I didn't want to look that bad. So that goes back to the part about being there at Survivor Series. Yeah, I was there. It was fun in the sense that, you know, my older kids loved it there, and it was a limo ride, and it was all you can eat shrimp, and, you know, the Sundays, and I, you know, and I could have, you know, friends of mine in the green room, and we always enjoyed ourselves. But I did think it was short-sighted and that it was hurting my ability to draw potentially for them. And then it was the next day, I'll take your word for it, that I was there on the airplane. That was one of the great...
I was just going to ask you, what was the whole deal with that promo?
Oh man, it was awesome. I just got the call. I told Vince when they agreed to let me out of the contract. I could have just gone at that moment. I think that was the beginning of November when we were in Long Island. And do you have the exact date of when I left?
I just know it was after Survivor Series. You did the thing on the airplane.
Yeah. What I told Vince is that I'd be willing to tie up the loose ends if you wanted me to be on a couple more shows to make the story make sense. I was more willing to do that. So they took me up on it. They told me I'd be flown to Charlotte, picked up and taken to a private airport, so I could be fired on the plane, and then I would fly back to Charlotte. And I fine, that's great, the interview on the plane was kind of like, it's one of those gray areas where you're shooting with what you're saying, but it's understood that, you're also trying to create good TV. And as a matter of fact, the thing about, hey, I don't know if I said my hard work built this plane, but something along those lines. And he was like, yeah, why don't you make the dude loved toilet? And that was my line, so it wasn't like we were at each other's throat or he was mad about anything that was said. And here's a weird statement. The last thing I said to Vince before I left, we got off the plane, and Ric Flair was standing on the tarmac. And I hadn't seen Flair, since my book had come out, where I was a little bit critical of him. And I said, Vince, if I could offer you one word of advice, not one, it turned out to be more than one word, but I said, I really think you should start having the guys work on doing promos from the heart. I said, I think what we're doing is we're nurturing a generation of guys who are, learned from a script. And I said, I think now that business is tailing off a little bit, that you need those guys who can do it. And I pointed to Flair and I said, there's one of the best guys ever at it. You should have the younger guys learn from him. And then I walked over and I said hello to Flair, and he was a perfect gentleman to me. So that was my last moment as a WWE wrestler, was shaking Flair's hand.
That whole airplane thing so most of that promo came from the heart then, it wasn't...
Oh yeah. When I said, hey, you did something unbelievable. You took a guy who loved this company and you made him hate it. Yeah, at that point that was true. I couldn't stand, I couldn't stand them,
When you and Vince were off camera, was it like grr with you guys?
No. I mean, no, not at all. But definitely there was that side of me that meant every word I was saying.
Obviously there were bad feelings between you and Vince at the time. How have they changed since that time?
Well, time passed, and time in some ways heals all wounds. And I think at that point, if someone had asked him what he thought about me personally, he still would have said he liked me. Maybe maybe I was a little difficult, because usually guys that work for him don't offer any resistance at all. But I did feel like I had something to offer, and that the way they were going about it was not taking advantage of that. I just think it was time, I mean, I didn't talk to him for 18 months. When I came back, he had a big hug for me, and imagine every time I come back, it'll be a happy occasion.
Okay. During that 18 months, was there ever a time when they really pushed for you to make a return? Or came to you with an idea of a storyline or an angle or a match you wanted to do?
One thing I'm not sure a lot of people knew is I did do appearances for them, especially, they knew that I really believed in some of the things they did with charitable causes, and I remained in contact with Sue Aitchison from WWE, who does that type of thing for them. And when something would come up, to go to the Marty Lyons dinner on behalf of WWE, I was more than happy to do it. And I remember being principal for a day in New York City, and it was my second year doing it. I've now done it 4 years in a row. The first year I'd been asked specifically by a special needs school for kids with really severe, physical and mental, I don't want to say deficiencies, but people who face those type of challenges. And I didn't know that the kids had specifically asked for a wrestler. And as it turned out, I just moved back to the New York area. I said, yeah, I'll do it. And it was such a great experience, going in and talking to the kids about, trying to help out their library and just meeting with the kids. That when the form came in the mail, I checked off special needs. And then I ended up not getting kids with physical and mental challenges. I got bad kids. I got emotionally disturbed kids, which in that case really means kids with prison records, or at least records, who would, for the most part, go on to prison. PS 368, and I got the, I do have a point here, I'll bring it up in a roundabout way. I got their, not their prospectus, but their school report in the mail, and it said percentage of kids working at or above grade level, 0. Percentage of children working far below grade level, 98.6. And it was like, I started laughing, like when I was like, this is impossible, how could any students be that bad? It turned out PS 368 was a school that kids go to when they have nowhere else to go, and they've been kicked out of every other school, and chances are they're going to go upstate and do some time and then live the rest of their lives, not, you know, in an largely unproductive way. So when I went there and met with Principal Rudy Giuliani, a cousin of the mayor, he said, "Do you know what kind of school this is?" And I said, "Yeah, I know what kind of school this is." He said, "You want to be here?" I said, "Yes, I want to be here." I came armed with only my children's book, which will be, it was Kurt's Coaster Crisis, which is one of the 2 stories in the new book, Tales from Mescal Lane. And these kids who were 16 and 17 years old, they sat there and listened. These are hardened, these are pretty tough kids. And they listened and they yelled out the rhymes, and with only 1 or 2 exceptions, you know, they really seemed to enjoy themselves, which made me think, you know, people will learn if it's made enjoyable to them. And I got on the phone, I called WWE on my way back from there. I was really, you know, kind of elated, and I was like, you know what, we can help some of these kids, and I understand I can do a lot more with them than I can do on my own, which is a reason why I will always try to keep it, which is part of the reason why, after feeling hurt by the Ric Flair situation, that I went from saying, hey, I'm not going to deal with those guys again, to saying, hey, I'm not going to let Ric Flair ruin my relationship, because ultimately a lot of people stand to lose from that, and that's including the kids and education in inner cities and things like that. But in this point, I said, we can do this. You know, we can make a little bit of a difference, and ultimately, you know, we decided not to do the book then, but they were agreeable to working with me. So that was such a long story that I lost my point, but I think the point is that I was not always out of contact with them.
What made you to return to WWE to do the referee thing for the Triple H Nash Hell in a Cell match?
Oh, let me see. I did have my novel was coming out. It didn't escape me that you know, it wouldn't hurt to have WWE mention that fact. And I was in the city talking to my editor. I think this is at the end of May 2003, and a fan on the street said, "Hey, did you hear about Triple H and Nash?" And I said, No, what? And they said, "They're doing a Hell in the Cell." So I just took it in, and I was driving, and I took the train halfway home, and then I was driving, I was kind of stuck in traffic, and all of a sudden just clicked, like, you know, it makes perfect sense. I mean, there are some things in wrestling that you kind of have to force on the audience, you know, and there's some things that will just be readily accepted. And I thought the idea of me as the troubleshooting referee on the Hell in a Cell made perfect sense. I played a little phone tag. I called up.
So you went to them with the idea?
I did. I went to them with the idea. I'm not ashamed to say that. They didn't come crawling to me. And I wish I'd known about it, or I'd called the very next day, the same day that I found out. But what happened, we played a little bit of phone tag, and it was only like 2 weeks left. I wish that by the time that I finally touched base with Vince, we only had 1 week of TV to build it up. I think if we would have had that extra week and maybe showed, you know, the referees bailing out. As it was, they had like 1 30-second thing where the referee said, I'm not doing that match. And then Austin's like, I know this crazy SOB. And given that we only had one week, it was good. But if we'd had another week to illustrate the dangers, and instead of saying, hey, Timmy White never wrestled again, never refereed again, they could have shown what happened to him in the Hell in a Cell. They could have showed that the you know, photographer, the video guy in the first Undertaker Michaels match was carried on a stretcher. They could have shown just how dangerous this match was, and that there was only one guy fit to do it. Like I said, as it was, you know, good promotion, good build up for the 1 week we had, but it really could have benefited from at least another week.
So it was only supposed to be a short-term deal then?
Yeah, and then they asked me, hey, do you want to stick around for these next couple of weeks? And I really, I'd mentioned this in an interview, a print interview, but I don't know if I've ever spoken about it, that I was really nervous about returning. In my head, I had distanced myself from them to the point where I didn't know if I'd ever return. Sometimes I doubted I'd ever return, and I remember specifically being in my motel room in Miami and like looking at the clock and being like, all right, I can wait another 15 minutes, another 20 minutes, and finally I thought, hey, I've got to show up for work, and I was standing outside the doors. I was like, all right, I'm going to open these doors, and this is like, you're coming home again, and I opened up the door and I said hello to one person, can't remember who it was, and then Stacy Keibler came running. And all of a sudden it felt, it felt really good to be back. I'd always liked her, and she's like, man, gave me the big hug, and there was Test right behind her, like, hey Mick, how you doing? And then Austin and Briscoe and all the guys that I liked, and I ended up having a better time there than I would have imagined, and so when they asked me to stick around for a couple more Raws, and they, agreed to, put the book on the website and get the McFoley.com up and running again, it turned out to be a really, really nice situation. And one thing Vince said to me that first day back, he said, I'm going to tell you the same thing I told The Rock. After what you've done here, you can consider the WWE to be your playground, and you're welcome to come back here and play whenever you want. So that's an open invitation, and I might do it like The Rock does, where I just show up just because I feel like it, and lend a little something to the guys there. And the other thing I talked to him about was the children's book, and I said, this is this is something I think we should do. So I haven't taken him up on the offer to play in the playground anytime I want, but we do have the children's book coming out, and I feel really good about that.
Okay. Then the blow off then was you did the angle at Madison Square Garden where they gave you the hardcore award. Well, who came up with the idea, and what was your thoughts on it?
I can't remember. It wasn't my idea. It may have been Stephanie's idea, or it may have been Brian Gewertz's idea. I do know that at first it was supposed to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, and then a couple of people were like, yeah, the guy, he's not, it's like Blassie and guys like that it might hurt the credibility of a guy who was fairly young. And I got to say, I thought I looked pretty good on that show. I looked younger. I even had a few people ask me if I'd had work done. And Vince said to me, you look great, you look 10 years younger. I was like, Vince, you'd be surprised what getting away from this company will do for your outlook on life, I said, you ought to try stepping away. Vince could never step away from wrestling. But what was the question?
What the whole idea
Talking about
was.
my looks, yeah. Surgery I had done.
Well,
the
idea,
idea,
the hardcore awarding.
Yeah, so that idea came up, and they did that great video, and I mean had the former hardcore guys come out and all that. And one thing I'll mention here, this is kind of sad. Right before he died, Crash Holly, had some comments about me. Were not flattering. And I asked Stevie Richards after he died, I was like, what did I do to Crash? Like, I always liked him, and I always liked what he did, with the 24/7 thing. I think I may have said on a couple of occasions that it turned the hardcore belt into a joke, which it did eventually. But man, you got TV to do every single week, first run programming. Where do you go with that hardcore belt? I thought the stuff they did involving Crash and the stuff of the Playground USA or whatever it is, Playtime USA in Brooklyn, and the stuff involving the actor from Shaft was great stuff. But I think he may have heard that I said it turned it into a joke, which hurt his feelings. And Stevie said when he wasn't included as being one of the hardcore guys when I came back, that it really bothered him. And I wish that he had felt comfortable enough with me to mention that. Because it wasn't like I said, hey, here's the list of guys that I want out there. The only guy I asked for is, can we see if we can fly Terry Funk in for that thing? And I think, I was, that the mindset was that the hardcore wrestlers were guys who were hardcore, whereas Crash was kind of like the anti-hardcore champion. But I just wanted to say that I really, I'm sorry he felt that way, and I do wish he felt comfortable enough to bring it up, because I would have loved, if it meant a lot to him, if I'd known that, I would have loved to have had him out there. But it was a great moment to put that video together, and the fact that Austin said some stuff that I think he really meant. Gave me the big hug, not the heel Austin hug, but the babyface Austin hug was a hard thing to get out of him, and I got it, and they put that great video together. And then we shot that, we did that angle. There was a feeling, I can't remember if at that time we were thinking about doing something where I'd come back with Randy, or if I just wanted to do a little something, to kind of help out when I left. I did, man, that hurt, Randy.
He hit you with the frame.
Yeah, the frame. The truth is, that's Tommy Dreamer's belt. They gave it to him, so they had to get it off Tommy's mantle to bring it back so I could get hit with it. And it was, I thought it would smash over my head, but it was like in some type of plexiglass. And so Randy hit me. It's like that worst case wrestling scenario. Like, if you're going to be busted wide open, at least have people notice it. To be stitched up by yourself in a dressing room that no one can see is really goes against everything that the business stands for. Not only that, but I really hurt my shoulder going down the steps, right in the shoulder blade. Hurt me for weeks. And I was kind of riding an emotional high, even when I left. I was like, I realized, it hurts, but it's kind of like a deep bone bruise type thing. By the time I got home, it took me about an hour and a half to get home, and I was really hurting. So I went and fed the dogs, and then I laid down, and my wife was like, can you take care of the guinea pig cage? Guinea pigs don't have a cage, they have a children's pool that they hang out in, so there's more room for them to roam. And I specifically remember being up there and like shoveling it out, with the dustpan, and I'm cleaning that up, and I was like, 2 hours ago, 20,000 people were chanting my name, and now I'm shoveling it. Guinea pig poo. But it was cool. It was a great time to be back.
Were you mad at Orton at all for stiffing you or the
stairs?
stairs?
No, not at all. No, it wasn't. And the stairs was being kicked down. I mean, there was, their stunt guy was like trying to set up like a protective back shelf for me, and I was like, hey, I don't know if you know this about me, but I'm Mick Foley. I don't wear protective stuff, And on the way home, I was like, oh, why didn't I put the protective stuff on? So there was no hard feelings at all. I was happy that he was able to run with it for a little while. He did get some good mileage out of that one bump.
Why did Terry Funk decline?
I don't know why the Funker declined. I heard it had something to do with money. I wish he'd been there, I really do. But I've talked to him since then, and it's never come up, so it's not like I have any bad feelings about it.
Okay. How about the writers at that time? What were they like? Or did they really have any input on the speech you gave that night?
You're looking to get me to bury the writers, right?
I just asked what they were like, that's all.
I think Gewurz gets a bad deal. He's a little guy, but he'll actually stand up and air his opinions. And I think he does a good job. I think it's pretty much a thankless job. I mean, no one, when things were going great and Hauser was selling out, it's not like the wrestlers are going, the writers rule, man. I'm getting great pops based on what they're writing for me. It's always, those writers suck, when things aren't going good. I still think, hey, these guys, the younger guys, they have to learn it. They have to learn it. I mean, even it's such a lost art that it works for guys like me.
Speaking from the heart. Right?
Yeah, I mean, it works. I wish Flair had more of a chance to do that type of thing. I know when Piper came back, Piper was still in a rough way from that car accident. And to me, I mean, Piper should have been the mouthpiece. The whole idea, and I know I'm jumping around, but the whole idea of Sean O'Hare looking like $1 million standing outside watching Roddy Piper wrestler was completely opposite of what it should have been. Piper came back, and what I'm getting back to is the promos from the heart. It's like, bam, there he goes, and it's clear that he's in a league apart from the rest of the guys in the show. Even when Hogan came back, I'm not a huge fan of his promos, but he's got it. He's got his style down. And I'm not saying you can't do a great promo based on what other people have written, because certainly there are great actors who take writing that they haven't done and make it their own. But I did speak up one time at one of the production meetings, not a production meeting, but team meetings, and said, hey, the guys need to, if they're going to have stuff written for them, they need to make it feel real. So that was one thing I said I will always maintain that the business is lacking in that. They need guys who can do it from the heart. But back to your writing questions. I don't know everything that goes on. You know, I was kind of like in my own happy little world. You know, I was happy to be back. I didn't get grievances from other people. They weren't coming up to me telling me what they did and didn't like about the show. As a viewer of the show, you know, obviously there are a lot of times when I think things don't make sense or could be better explained. But I think part of it is there has to be a rapport between the writers and the wrestlers. And the rapport should be such that when you spend time talking to the writers, you're not accused of sucking up by guys like Ric Flair.
Okay.
Especially when it's your stuff that you've written. You know what I mean? And I've said publicly, I'll get back to the Flair stuff in a second, but if I was going to suck up to anybody, it would be Vince. You know what I mean? As you can see on this tape, I don't suck up to Vince. I like Vince. I think that some of the stuff he does is great, and I think other stuff is a little lackluster. But if I was going to suck up to anybody, it wouldn't be Gewirtz or Hayes, it would be Vince.
Okay. When you tell the younger guys about speaking from the heart, do they understand what you're saying, or does it kind of go over their heads?
Well, I don't make it a point to say to each and every guy, but I think it's just, you know, the business was hot when guys were doing it off the script. And I think there may be the mindset, hey, that's why it was hot. I remember specifically talking to Shawn Michaels after he retired and when he made one of his, you know, momentary appearances as commissioner. I said, you know what's going to be strange is when the business cools off, the business will need guys who know how to do those promos, but because they're doing those promos in front of crowds that aren't sold out, they'll be seen historically as the guys who couldn't draw. When the truth is, right now, anyone can draw. You know, I used to fight with JR on the phone over my payoffs at the house shows, and he'd say we weren't in the main event, and I'd say, well, who is the main event? The cards are selling out. We put WWE on the marquee, and the houses are selling out. Nobody's drawing the house. We are, the company, you know, that maybe the payoff should have been a little bit more even across the board. But I do think we've reached that point where you really need guys who can do that, and there aren't that many of them around.
Do you think that it would be easy for these guys to learn, or do you think that like they just don't understand the whole concept?
It's hard to learn. You know, you can't teach experience, and I'm really thankful that when I came up, I had the independents, and I had Memphis, and I had Dallas, you know, and I had a Continental. Where I can make my mistakes without the pressure of, and it felt like a lot of pressure at the time, you know, when Lance Russell hands you the microphone. That seems like a lot of pressure at the time. But there was not the pressure that if you screw up, the entire country or the entire country's worth of wrestling fans are seeing you screw up. And guys who are showing up, they're not polished products. I mean, The Rock was able to pull it off, Kurt Angle was able to pull it off, but there are a lot of guys who fall by the wayside who, if given not 1 year in OVW, but 5 or 6 years, or in Austin's case, it was 8 years before I got to WWE. In my case, it was 11 years before I got there. Not only when you have that experience do you kind of know how to work a crowd and how to give your promos, but you also know how to, when I say assert yourself backstage, like with the writers, I don't mean that in a negative way, but I mean to be able to go up and say, you know, guys, look, I don't think this is going to work. In the case of the Mankind character, to say, you know, no, I don't really think I should be wearing the mental patient's outfit. It surprised me that Ron Simmons, with the experience he had, couldn't have said, no, I don't want to wear the blue Spartacus helmet. You know, that there's a certain amount of, you know, there is experience that can't be taught. And I don't think if you go to a guy and say, hey, you know, do this from the heart, that's as quick as you know, snapping your fingers or turning on a switch. It's something that has to be learned. But I am a big advocate of of visualization. I don't mean to sound like DDP here, but because I don't think anything is possible like DDP does. But I think, you know, driving down the road, listening to the type of music that motivates you by yourself. Will result in some of the greatest 3 a.m. promos the business will never hear. And I knew that my challenge when I was working, for example, on this WrestleMania return was to be able to cut the same promo in front of the crowd that I knew I could have cut if I'd pulled over my car and delivered it at 3 a.m. on Interstate 75. And I'm not sure if the guys have that mindset. I know when I was a commissioner, it was nice because I was able to think of this book that I ended up writing because I wasn't focused on wrestling. I didn't have to come up with promos, and I didn't have to come up with stuff that was going to grab people emotionally. I'd get there, they'd kind of tell me what they wanted, and I'd put a little Mick Foley spin on it, and have a great time doing it. But it wasn't like I was thinking about those promos 24/7 like so many of the great promo men of the past have.
Okay. All right, going to the angle in December 2003 when you returned and replaced Steve Austin as co-general manager. Right. Well, what do you think of the whole angle? And at that time, was it designed that you were going to do this program with Orton that would lead to Backlash?
Yeah, by that time that was decided. Randy has been very good about, letting me know how much he appreciates, what we did together. And I tell him, hey, you fulfilled your end of the deal. And I said, I wouldn't have come back if I didn't think you could have, because I was watching the show. And if I didn't think that he was up to it, and if I hadn't seen good progress, I never would have gone to Vince with the idea. But I did. I called him.
So you went to Vince with the whole
Yeah, I went to Vince again. He didn't come crawling to me. But he will one day. He'll come crawling. I called up his assistant, and I know I must be held in fairly high regard because I was in Vince's office the next day, pitching my Plan A. This is a breaking story. I don't think anyone's ever heard this. Plan A that I pitched to Vince was, what I should do is show up as a surprise contestant at the King of the Ring, win the King of the Ring, show up on Raw claiming I'd take on the Raw champion, show up the next day or 3 days later on TV on SmackDown claiming I'd take on their champion, and through the creative process that you have where you can make up the rules as you go along, determine that because I was not officially a Raw or SmackDown guy, that I could choose which opponents. In my case, I would choose both of them in a three-way to unify the WWE title, in which case I would win the unified WWE title, to which Vince said, no, I don't think we're going to go in that direction. But I tried, and that's why I tell the younger guys, you have an idea, have a plan B. And I said, well, I got another idea concerning Randy Orton. And I started talking about this thing, and I talked about walking out of the match. I had no idea how controversial that would become within the company. And then and Vince was kind of looking like he thought that was a crazy idea as well. And then I said, and then when I leave, Randy will air political attack ads. And he said, political attack ads? Like, he became intrigued. And I said, Vince, everybody hates those things. I mean, just imagine. And all I said was, Mick Foley claims to be the hardcore legend. But is he really? And Vince started laughing. He started writing down, notes. I don't know what he wrote. Maybe he's doodling a picture. I don't know, for all I know. But he seemed to really like it. And I basically laid out what I wanted to do. And when I came back, it's not like I said, hey, I need to be on top of this. This needs to be my angle. But it was just a given that I was going to be part of the creative process. So every week, it wasn't always my ideas coming to fruition. Sometimes it would be their ideas that I'd put my, put my spin on it.
Why did you want to come back to do this program?
Why? Let me see. I don't know if I guess I kind of got the itch, I'm really glad that, that I had the chance to do the Have a Nice Day and the Foley's Good and then lead to the novel, because the two things you really miss in wrestling, I think, for me at least, is the creative aspect of it, coming up with things, creating. And in a weird way, that canvas is like it's your place to do your specific work of art, which in some ways, and I think people that that care enough to buy this interview will understand that what we do is a kind of form of art. And then you also miss the adrenaline rush. So for me, I had it easy because I was writing and I was going on roller coasters. And as far as ego fulfillment, I was lucky that I was able to speak to colleges, and you go up there and you're on a stage and you're performing and you're getting pops, sometimes getting pops. And even when I speak to groups of school kids, about bullying and whatnot, even though it's a more serious subject, still, you get up there, you're being announced. I give them my CDs so they can, not in front of the school groups, but in front of the. Can I tell you a little? You want to hear my little personal favorite thing to do?
Sure.
Is to show up at these colleges and then, you know, and here he is, 3-time WWE champion, 2-time New York Times #1 bestseller. And he's been interviewed twice by Katie Couric. Those are my 3 claims to fame. Mick Foley, and I come out to the music, you know, and I'll be like, you know, people are cheering or whatnot, and I'll look like I'm mad about it. And I'll be like, oh, yeah, just cut the music. Look, I don't want to get off on the wrong foot here, but I got to tell you, I find this kind of offensive. You know, I'm here as a best-selling author. I'm here with somebody who has something to say, and this is kind of insulting to come out to this type of wrestling music. And the people, you know, some of them realize it's a joke, and then some of them don't. I said, so what I'd like to do is have this announcer guy do the announcement again, and I'll come back out to something a little more appropriate. The guy grabbed it. Okay, sorry about that. 3-time WWE champion, 2-time New York Times #1 best-selling author, and been interviewed twice by Katie Couric, Mick Foley. Then the next thing the crowd hears is, I'm an ass man. And I'll come out and do a little dance, and it's you know, I'll admit I do it over and over. Man, you know, it's a good cheap pop, so why not go for it? Now, what was the question again?
Why did you want to make your return at that time?
Yeah, you know what? I loved. You know what? All right, I remember exactly why. I had written another book that will be out next year. It's weird how the wheels of progress move so quickly in wrestling and so slowly in literature. So I wrote this thing a year and a half ago, and it won't be out for another year. And by that time, I'd realized that the wrestling world was not going to run out and buy a novel just because, you know, I wrote it, and the world in general is not going to run out and buy a novel that I wrote. At the same time, you know, I thought I had some good ideas, and one of the themes of this next book is whether a person should be remembered for a lifetime worth of work and service, or whether they might be remembered for one momentary lapse of courage. And I really explored that pretty well in this book. And there's a firefighter who has dedicated his life. He's a boy. He's the narrator's grandfather. He's dedicated his life to helping people. And he's essentially trying to make up for the time in 1911 where he locked in teenage girls who were working at a garment factory, and the place went up in flames. And so he's carried, and it actually happened, the Triangle Shirt and Waist Company. And I started thinking about that, and I thought, hey, what if I apply that to me as a wrestler, a guy who's known for 15 years of doing, you know, I guess within the context of a fictional show, doing courageous things, and whether or not he'd be remembered for 15 years of courage or one moment of cowardice. And you know, I saw it as a challenge. I don't think I saw it as much of a challenge as people in the office did. But I thought, hey, as long as I've worked for, you know, a year writing this book and it's not going to make much money, you know, maybe I could do it in an avenue where not only would I stand to make a little more money, but a lot of people will see it. You know, I think I'm a pretty good storyteller, and I thought that was a good story, and I thought I could make that carry over from the fireman in the Bronx to, you know, a wrestler in WWE.
Okay. Why Randy Orton?
Well, you know, we already had the history, you know, with Legend Killer,
Yep.
and I specifically wanted to do something with one of the younger guys.
Did you ask for Orton, or did they?
I did. No, I asked her Orton, and I know there had been some talk, like if I were to return, that Orton would be the guy, you know, and that's. I don't remember that was brought up in June when I took the bump down the stairs the previous June. But there was some speculation that I might do something. But I did watch the shows, and I know there was one pay-per-view where I thought, well, I don't know if he's there yet. You know, I don't know if I'm going to put my credibility on the line. Sorry about that. And health on the line for him if he's not there. And then I started seeing him having the good quality matches, you know, and some longer matches too, starting to establish his character, you know. And I thought, you know, everyone needs somebody in their career to help them get over that line. Not everybody, but it certainly helps. And I was lucky that a lot of people saw something in me, you know, when I was younger. It's funny because for as many, there are many old timers who don't like what I did, but at the same time, when I was breaking in, there were guys who did like what I did, who who liked my attitude, who were willing to help me. And I thought, in this day and age, when it's hard to really make stars, that I could, be partially responsible for helping to make somebody. And I do believe there's that feeling of giving back to the business, that if you've got credibility and stature in the business, that you ought to lend it to somebody else. It would have been nice to have come back in a ready-made dream match, and I think it's probably harder to create a need in the fans than to capitalize on a need that's already there. But as a storyteller of sorts, that's the story I wanted to tell. Which doesn't mean I won't come back in a ready-made dream match somewhere down the line. But I really wanted to do stuff that was good, and I wanted to tell that story.
What was Orton's reaction when he heard about the whole angle and everything? Was he obviously the angle is designed to put him over? How was he towards you about everything?
Well, I imagine probably in private in his hotel room he should be jumping up and down. He was he loved it, and he was very appreciative. His dad was very appreciative, which I really appreciated myself. And he came through on it, no doubt about it. He I think came through with a great performance at Backlash. So when I was watching the show the next night, and I heard people chanting his name, which he never expected, I took that as a compliment to me, because it did its job. It wasn't just that's Mick Foley putting over somebody. It was, here's a guy who deserves that spot.
Okay. You talked about the controversial angle, which you didn't think was going to be controversial, where you walked out instead of having the match, he spit in your face. Whoa, what did you think of the reaction that angle got?
Well, over the long run or at first?
Both.
Well, I got a call a couple days before we did it, and I think it was from Stephanie, and she said, we've decided that that's not going to work, and that we'd rather be beat up by Evolution. And I was, it was one of those things where your stomach just gets queasy. And here's everything I was planning on. And I was like, well, why? And she said, well, we don't think we think you're gonna really hurt yourself. We don't think it's gonna do anything for Randy. And I said, not do anything for Randy. I said, Stephanie, everybody in the business is beating me. Everyone can say they beat me up. I said, you don't think he'll get a lot further being able to say he backed down the hardcore legend than to say 3 guys jumped him and beat him up? And so I left one of my great Vince messages. I left. I'll remind me about a message. And when we talk about Flair, I'll tell you about a message I left at Vince's machine. I'm assuming you're going to ask me about Flair in a little bit. But I got on the phone and hey, Vince, this is Mick, and I just got to tell you that if you don't think I can pull this off without losing the wrestling fans, that I just have to say it's not showing very much faith in me. And as far as people tuning out because we're not giving them the match, I don't think we should be concerned about the type of people who are going to tune out, because they're not the type of people who are going to order a pay-per-view to begin with. I said, let's think about them and try to create something that's different. And hung up, and then I called back with another message. And he called me back, we're not doubting you. If anyone could pull it off, it'd be you. But it was a fight, and I later came to understand that there were a lot of people who just didn't think it was possible. And there is a mentality sometimes that when something hasn't been done, you don't think it can be done just because it hasn't been done. And I did think that I would have to explain myself when I came back. But based on the reaction I got in Philadelphia at Royal Rumble, there was really no explanation was necessary. It was nice that I had one, and I think it helped complete the story. But I wanted wrestling to become like a water cooler conversation, which it hadn't in a long time. I wanted people to say, well, what would you do in that situation? How should we judge him? Look at all the stuff he did in his career. And even if they're not taking it as a shoot, if you're getting them to talk about it as if they would talk about Seinfeld or about a drama on television, I wanted wrestling to become relevant again.
What were your favorite parts of the angle? I remember the one promo you did where you busted yourself open hard way.
Oh yeah.
Well, take us through the angle or some of your favorite moments.
Well, I think that was I think that was up there. believe it or not, I got a lot of criticism from the top wrestlers, and I only found that out because one of the other guys told me that the top wrestlers didn't like it. They thought I made Randy look weak. And I told Vince, I said, Vince, they've got some gall to say that I made him look weak.
How did you make him look weak?
Because he looked scared. And my feeling is, it's a game of give and take. You can't have a 100% cool guy. Everybody's got to have vulnerability. You can't have a 100% tough guy. I think part of the problem is that most of the business wants to be a tough guy, whether they are a babyface or a heel. And so we have, by and large, a very unlikable group of guys that don't show any vulnerabilities or any signs of compassion. And my feeling is, if you're Randy Orton and you realize that this guy's made you look weak, then that next week you're going to come back and you look up extra tough. I mean, there's going to be, to me, I like the subtleties and I like the shades of gray. And I like the idea that somebody's got to say, it would come back twice as angry because they realize they've been made to look weak. I mean, it's one of the ways, back to that phone call with Vince, when I was trying to pitch him on the idea of walking out, and he didn't think it was possible. I said, Vince, you ever see the movie Shane? I think so. I said, well, do this. Go and rent it, and then tell me how good the movie would have been if Shane stands up to the heels the first time they challenge him. There's no movie. They say, we don't like the looks of you, and then bam, bam, there's no movie at all. It's the idea that he's got to get back and get to that, ugly side of him, that side of him that he doesn't like, which ultimately helps him do the right thing. So there was the sense that I was making Randy look bad, and I thought that was, I don't understand that. I thought it was shallow, And what I said to Randy one time, he said, this is the way I see my character. Remember when I was a commissioner? And he said, yeah. I said, I was like the fun-loving guy. Yeah, and he said, that's who I want to be. And anything that prevents me from being that guy makes me mad, and I will do anything and conquer anybody in my way, overcome any obstacles so I can be that happy guy again. I said, the way I would see you is you want to be that cocky, confident guy. And anything that takes you out of that, it makes you look scared, makes you look bad, or even makes you mad, is getting in the way of being who you want to be, and you should do anything to get back to being that guy. And I'm hoping that that Randy listened to me more than he would listen to some of the other people, because I can honestly say that I never had anything but the best intentions for him, and I'm not sure he's going to come across a lot of opponents who are going to feel that same way, that their goal is to make him look as good as possible. Because ultimately that's a good reflection on me, because I look at it and I said to my wife, after Randy won the championship, I said, hon, do you think that he'd be the champion right now if we hadn't done our program? And she said, no. And I mean, that's just kind of restating the obvious to me. But I do think, I look at his championship, I'm not taking credit for it because I'm not out there doing the matches, but saying, would he be where he was if it wasn't for that program? And probably the answer is no. So I don't know, I think so many people are used to guys having ulterior motives, and maybe they assumed that I did too, but I needed to look tough, and I needed to remind people of who I was and what I was capable of in order for that angle to proceed. And I believe, as a guy who shed his share of blood, that one little trickle that came down my face was more important than all the gushers that I've hit over the years. I really think that added to it.
How much of the promos and the angles were you, and how much was the writers?
Oh, you love this writers thing. You know what? Promos, they would never tell me what to say. They might tell me a couple bullet points, and they might want to hear the ideas I had. In which case, I always say, well, it's going to sound a lot better out there, because I was never one for really performing, in the dressing room, so people could hear what I was going to say. I'm lucky that I benefited from the trust they put in me. I think I had a pretty good track record of coming through. So when I said, trust me, it's going to be good, they generally did trust me.
Okay. Was there anything that you wanted to do that didn't happen? Like, I know there might have been something with Bob Orton.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, this is my biggest downer. There were a couple things, and like looking at it now, and even as soon as I heard the other news, sometimes okay, maybe that's a good thing. Sorry, it's a good thing they didn't go in that direction. Like the political attack ads, by and large, you know, they said, okay, what do you want to do in these things? And I gave the guy just that one idea, you know, just that same line. And Mick Foley claims to be a hardcore legend, but is he really? And the guy was like, what else do you want? I said, no, you know, just play that up, because I have a lot of confidence in the video, you know, video production people. They came out of that first one, it was great. So the second one, what do you want to do? I said, just keep going with it. And the end one, I wanted someone making bogus accusations that I tried to fondle them, or something ridiculous, you know, that would really make a guy come out. Like anyone would say, well, that's BS, he's going to be mad about that. And I was overruled. I still think it would have worked, but it wasn't necessary. Maybe it would have been too over the top. Another thing that got shot down was after my eye injury. I thought, you know, that the match would be put in jeopardy unless I had some type of protective gear, and that I think Stone Cold was still the sheriff at the time, and there was going to be this big thing: can Mick Foley actually wrestle at WrestleMania? Can he come up with the correct, you know, device? And that Steve Austin was going to be out throughout the show, like investigating, and then at the end, it was like, my God, I think we got a sighting of Mick Foley. And then right before the show turned off the air, I was going to be in the boiler room and turn around with the Mankind mask, say, have a nice day, and come back at WrestleMania as Mankind. So that's kind of a major thing to be, you know, to have rejected. It didn't hurt the match that I came out by myself, you know, as myself. And by that time, the swelling and the discoloration was gone anyway. But the big letdown was the Bob Orton angle. And looking back on it now, the timing was a little off, because what should have happened was The Rock should have come to my rescue like he did in Atlanta. One of the great moments in my career, his pop was one of the great moments in my career, because I had worked so hard for it. Do you know what I mean? I mean, not that he wouldn't have gotten a great pop, but it was really meaningful.
The circumstances.
Yeah, circumstances. And even at that line, what happened is the word had gotten out that he was there. Now, I didn't want one of those situations like Rock had with Goldberg, where Rock's saying, well, there's no one else for me to take on, and the crowd's chanting Goldberg. And Rock can either A, pretend he doesn't hear it, or B, say, oh, they know the Rock's accountant is Ira Goldberg. And it was, you know, how do you deny the obvious? So we were afraid that we'd go out and people would be chanting Rock's name, and I'd be pretending I didn't hear it, you know, which would make everybody involved look like a jerk. So that's why we said, well, the safety is that, well, you know, The Rock is, you know, he's going to be my partner, but he's not here. And so that's why I did the thing where I kind of backed down from Evolution. And they said, well, you know, Randy said, why don't you tell Mr. Hollywood, you know, that, you know, after WrestleMania, not only will he not be walking tall, he won't be walking at all. And I was like, I'm going to tell him right now. You know, I'm going to call him right now. The people actually popped. It was like such a wimpy, I'm going to call him right now. And then, I mean, over and over, I kept telling, like, Rock and Vince, like, here's the line, you know. And when I go to leave, I turn around and say, hold on a second. Instead of me telling him on the phone, why don't you tell him to his face? I said I was coming back to Atlanta. I never said I was coming back alone. And bam, that music hit and came out. It was you know, it was, to me, I'm getting goosebumps thinking of, can't really see him, but getting goosebumps thinking about it, because it was just, you know, it was amazing. Bam, that should have been the go home moment. That should have been it. Rock giving his thing, your days of beating on Mick Foley are over. I wish we had done This Is Your Life the day after Mania, because then it could have been like when I sang He's a Jolly Good Fellow to Al Snow, you know, after yet another Al Snow loss. It would have been like him consoling me. The way I did having This Is Your Life for The Rock was like my makeup present to him for actually like getting offense in on him in a 4-man, you know, at the pay-per-view the night before. It wasn't probably the right way to wasn't the right way to go home. I mean, they didn't need any more heat on me, but I wish that we had done it the night after Mania, and I wish we had included Bob Orton. I'll tell you why, but I started laughing because I was thinking about Snuka. And the idea, I don't like to do promos in the ring. I don't like to rehearse anything. But when there's 8 people involved and camera blocking, and this is like a 25-minute segment, they wanted to make sure we weren't standing all over each other, you know. So Snuka's here, and everyone, I think, knows the way I feel about Snuka. I mean, you know, it wasn't for him, I probably wouldn't be in wrestling, although, personally, he scares me a little bit, you know. And so we're out there, and Snuka's line is supposed to be, Brother Rock, let me tell you something, the Superfly loves pie. That's the line, right? Thank goodness we rehearsed it, because Snook's standing right there, and he says, "Brother Rock, let me tell you something about the Superfly. The Superfly loves cake." Oh man, and I'll tell you one thing: The Rock, he's made millions of dollars in Hollywood, like $50 million or whatever. When we did the rehearsal afterwards, I went to him. I was like, "Rock," I said, "You mind if I, give you my take on something?" And he was like, "Yeah, sure." I said, "You're kind of being mean to the old lady." Like, I said, "She's old. Everyone can tell it. You don't have to reiterate how old she is." I said, "It seems kind of mean." And he was like, "You think so?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I do." And he went out, and to his credit, he was much easier on the old lady. And I think the fact that she visually looked old was more than enough, for people to get that idea. But the Bob Orton thing, what I wanted, and I don't know why they shot, there were a couple other things. I thought Randy, after doing the beating on me, should have been wearing a brace or a cast or something. And that could have tied into Cowboy Bob with the cast that he wore for like 15 years. And I went to Vince, and I spelled this out to a couple of different people. Adam Pernucci from TV production, Chris Chambers, one of the other producers, Gewurz, and it was like time tested, like they loved this idea. And I went to Vince, and ultimately it didn't get done. But I thought, here's WrestleMania 20. Why not have the same guys who were in the corners of the WrestleMania 1 main event in the corners of this main event? Superfly in our corner, Bob Orton Jr. in that corner. And what I thought was, you do the same thing. Superfly loves cake, the whole line. And now they're going to introduce, Mick Foley's, his most famous tag team partner. And they're going to be starting giving the people the impression that would lead JR to say, "My goodness, they're going to bring out the legendary Terry Funk here," And instead, out comes this like goofy piano music, like din, 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 din. And here comes Bob Orton Jr. with that same leather vest, and the cowboy hat. He's got the same damn cast on. How he always had that disingenuous smile, that really hokey smile. I think he was underrated as being. I thought he was funny in very subtle ways. He didn't get to talk that much as Piper's henchman and all that. I don't think Orton's humor was ever appreciated. And he's got that voice that's going to sound like Randy Savage, but he's got that gravelly voice, and he was going to say something. And this is the truth. I wrote this in my book, is that my wife and I think that our first son, Dewey, was conceived on a trip to Aruba. Not the trip to Aruba, but once we were in Aruba, we think he was conceived in Aruba. And I wanted Bob to come out and say, "Cactus Jack, I don't know if you know this, but my boy Randy was next door when you were conceiving your son. So his first sexual experience was by himself thinking about your old lady." And so, now I'm getting a little pissed about it. He's like, "Oh, wait, hold on a second, don't be worrying so bad." He goes, "I want to take you down a little trip down memory lane." And then some music come on, very tacky piano music, and then a picture's going to appear. Bob Orton and I were tag team partners for Herb Abrams UWF. We tag teamed like a dozen times. Actually, we're not a bad team, but it's one snapshot. And the way I was telling the production people, because they put together some of these incredible montages, really like award-winning video stuff. And I thought, all this is one snapshot shown as many different ways as possible. Here's a snapshot, and then it's showing up on the left-hand side of the screen. Now it's moving, it's spinning in circles, and you got like starbursts, but it's the same damn picture, over and over. And all of a sudden, Randy would go, "Memories." He would start singing "Memories," which would cause The Rock and I to finally laugh because it's so ridiculous, and that's where we could jump from behind. And I thought it would add, just that little. That little extra to Mania to have those guys in the corner, and I thought it'd be funny as hell to hear Bob Orton Jr. sing "Memories," but it didn't work out that way. I still thought that segment was good. I liked doing it. I thought the timing of it, which they were really worried about. It wasn't like it was in the middle of the show. I mean, it had to end at the exact right time. So the timing, and we thought we'd have to rush through it, and we didn't. It worked out good, but I don't think it was the right spot in the right place. It should have been done the day after Mania, because looking back on it, they didn't have a whole lot the day after Mania. And we had, I think, a full 5 programs working up the Backlash. So I wish we'd had that. But all things being considered, I was very, very happy with the Mania build-up.
Okay. Now, you already talked about the Mania match, so we'll skip to the Backlash match. What are your memories of the Backlash match?
Oh, you know what? I've been, given the same answer when, when people ask me about my favorite match. I've always said Shawn Michaels '96, and I'm actually leaning to that Backlash match. I'm trying to, think why I haven't fully appreciated it, and I think it's because after a match, I don't mean to compare wrestling to sex, but in the same way that you can have really great sex, or at least I've been told people have really great sex, if you rush out of the room, you don't remember the great sex. You kind of need that time to lay back and think about just how great it was, And I think in the same way with wrestling, I remember with Shawn Michaels when I wrestled him in '96, I just lay in bed there in Philadelphia and I ordered, I'd been watching my weight at that time, ordered a big fattening meal and I ordered a pay-per-view, and it was just so nice to lay back and really take it all in. The same thing after my supposed last match against Triple H in Hartford in Hell in a Cell. I had a chance to lay back by myself in the room and appreciate it. With Backlash, my 1.5-year-old, he wasn't 1.5 days, 1 year and 2 months, he was in the hospital. Been in the hospital for 3 days. And I'm catching, instead of sitting back and reflecting on what a great night it was, I'm taking the red eye back. And then by the time he got better, the Flair comments that he in England got to me. And I never really got a chance to really sit back and enjoy that match, But I think as time goes by, I'll think about how much it meant to me on a personal level, because I was able to kind of redeem myself for Mania, and I was able to be, I think, as good as I ever have been, and also able to really do something concrete for the company. The buy rate was a little disappointing. I really thought I could have added some more buys to it. I publicly said to the guys I thought I was going to add 100,000 buys. I think several months from now, 290,000 buys for a brand-specific pay-per-view will be seen as being really good. Maybe we sacrifice some buys because at that point, maybe Randy wasn't firmly a main event guy, but I would gladly sacrifice those buys to be able to, do what we did and establish him. So.
Did you put together that match for the most part with the thumbtacks? And how was Randy about taking all the thumbtacks and all that kind of stuff?
I'd like to leave a lot of this, what actually went into the making of the match, up to people's imaginations. But I will say that Randy Orton wanted to be in the tacks. And, when you ask me about Flair, he specifically mentions the thumbtacks. I don't care how many thumbtacks he's landed on. There's a time and a place for those type of things. And I think and I hope Randy will be a huge star in this business. And I think if you ask him 10 years from now what the most important bump he ever took was, I know what it should be. I don't know what I'll tell you, but it should be the bump in the thumbtacks. Because it did a lot to making people take him seriously. For some reason, as ridiculous it seems, landing in tacks doesn't necessarily make you a tough guy. But the sight of him in those tacks without his shirt, sticking all over him, his body shaking, his back actually bleeding, was like really an enduring image. And he was there because he wanted to be there. Not that he wasn't regretting it the moment he landed in there. You can't act good enough to have your whole body shaking, and he was really hurting. But I think, that it wasn't too much, it wasn't excessive, and it was a hell of a reaction because nobody expected Randy Orton to end up in the thumbtacks.
All right, last wrestling in-ring question.
Yeah.
You recently went to Japan for Hustle to wrestle Kawada. What was that like in working Kawada?
Oh,
and it was a last-minute deal, too.
Yeah, I can say without too much shame that I did it strictly for the money. But 2 days after the Randy Orton match, I tried to get up from a chair and I could not stand. I couldn't walk. I don't know what happened. I imagine it was because of stuff I'd done either in training or during the match. I could not stand, and then my knee just swelled up horribly, and my manager Barry Bloom knew about my knee problems, and he said, called me a couple days later, and he's like, how's the knee? I said, it's not too good. He said, can you stand? And I said, can you walk? I said, not too well. And he said, can you wrestle in Japan in 5 days? And then he threw a dollar figure at me, and I said, yes. So that kind of money, I don't know what kind of match I would give them, but I'll be there. At the time, they had said I could do anything I wanted to do. Goldberg was supposed to face Kawada, but the plan was for me to fill in the 6-man or 8-man hardcore match. And I had to go out to LA a couple days before the Japan show anyway, so I met with their people out there. They showed me a couple of matches, and they showed me the hardcore match. Showed me Kawada against, I think, Mark Coleman. They showed me the hardcore match, and I sat there, and man, my knee was really, really bothering me. But I said, I just thought, we're already making me a replacement to put me in the middle of a 6-man match that the fans take as comedy. It to me is not the best way to use me. As weird as it sounds, I want companies to be happy I came. Granted, they lost a fortune on that show, and they might not be happy that I came. But I did say I would work with Kawada, and they said you can do anything you want, including the bat. And then when word got back to him I wanted to use the bat, he was like, ooh, no. So we got off the next best thing, which is me trying to use the bat. And all things considered, I thought, we had a decent match. He was just coming back from surgery. I was having a lot of trouble moving, and even though only a few weeks had passed, I lost my wind. So I looking back on it, the way to do that would have gotten a ton of heat on him, like guys like Gordy and Steve Williams did, and Stan Hansen, and I just didn't have it. So it wasn't an embarrassment, and I did do it solely for the money, but it was a lot of money, and it wasn't that bad.
Now, you recently went down to a NWA reunion Mid-Atlantic area, and when you go down to those things, you see a lot of the old-timers that you probably grew up in the business with. Do they react to you differently now after all the success you've had, or is it kind of like old times?
Well, I don't know all the guys. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think of...
And I know you did one in Texas, too. With
the Texas one was great. I hadn't done a fans convention in a while. And I had always joked around. Every time I saw Akbar, I would tell him I'm trying to put together a Devastation Incorporated reunion, which would involve hundreds of guys, So this promoter actually had the same idea with only like 5 guys. It was me and Kamala and King Kong Bundy, the Missing Link, and of course Akbar. And I'll tell you what my favorite part of the day was, though. I met Stan Musial, which was cool, and I told him I'd grown up with a autographed picture of him on my wall from the time I was a young kid, so that was cool. But also, believe it or not, was meeting and talking with Kevin Von Erich for the first time, probably 14 years. So Kevin sat in on the Devastation Incorporated Roundtable, which was a Q&A. And he was never officially a part of Devastation, but it was really good to see him. Another one of my favorite parts of the day is they had a barbecue, which I believe they have every year for anyone who's ever been involved in the wrestling business, especially in that area in Texas. And a lot of the old timers were there. I'd say like 50 old timers. And I always have this feeling that maybe the old timers don't like me because I represent this current product in sports entertainment as opposed to athletics being what they think wrestling should be. And I went to the thing, and anyone who wanted to was invited to go up and tell a story in front of the boys. And we had to go and do our Devastation Incorporated roundtable appearance in a little while, so we didn't have that long. So I went there, had something to eat, listened to a couple stories, and then one of the guys came up and said, "Can you go up and talk? I think it would mean a lot to the older guys." And so I went up there, and it was, I was warmly received. So I get the feeling, I'm starting to get the feeling, Pat Patterson told me the same thing when I had reservations about going to Cauliflower Alley Club, that with a few exceptions, the guys, they like the younger guys, especially the ones who show respect for the history in the business. So I get the feeling I may be better liked, than I thought. Not everyone agrees with the style I had, and there'll be some people who flat out hate it and therefore don't like me by extension. But I didn't have a cross word with anybody, even J.J. Dillon, who I knocked a little bit in the book. And I did say, and this is something I just said to Bill Apter on the way over, as I ended up sitting next to Bill Apter from Atlanta to Fayetteville. I said, Bill's going to back me up here. I'm not just saying this. I said, you know what, but I didn't have any problems with JJ. There's a bigger illustration here. I'm using JJ Dillon to illustrate. There's a point here which I'm using JJ to illustrate. And I mentioned to Bill, I said, you know what, you have to be writing whatever you're thinking about at that time comes down in the paper. I didn't have any ill will towards JJ, but when I started writing about the phone call that I'd make once a year to WWF, I'd always get JJ. And that 1 minute of time he would give me every year came back to me as I was writing on the paper. You know what I mean? So I ended up saying F-in JJ Dillon, this, that. Then I felt better about doing it. Never really disliked him. And I realized that, people can sometimes say and write things that they may not mean as fully as it comes out. So I'm giving Ric Flair a little benefit of the doubt, although he's still a no good bastard.
All right, well, that actually leads into a question that I had about the books.
Okay.
Was there anything that you ever wrote in any of the books that you wish that you hadn't, or maybe your thoughts or opinions of the person have changed and you wish that you could take it back?
What is great about doing the book is it's very therapeutic to tee off on people, but you also realize that's your job writing a book is not to settle grudges. At least that's what I was told. Apparently, Ric Flair feels differently. So I may end up publishing, maybe even on the internet, like the lost Ric Flair pages. Because believe me, there's a lot of stuff I wrote about him. When I was writing, all that stuff just came back to me. This is writing Have a Nice Day. Because you have to remember, I think I was 25 at the time, 25, 26, and I could see the future out there, and a better life for my family. And as far as I was concerned, he was the guy preventing me from having that. So I did talk to Flair about my book. I talked to him about it the week after the Royal Rumble. I believe it was 2 weeks after. And there had been this...
this year's Royal Rumble?
Yeah, this year's Royal Rumble. It was 2 weeks after because we were in Hershey, Pennsylvania the week after. I got a phone call during that time from the Marty Lyons Foundation telling me about this young man who did not have much time left, and his dream was to be part of WWE as a wrestler, and that was not going to happen. And so they wanted to know if I might be able to do something. And so I said, well, we're going to be wrestling in Nassau Coliseum, in 2 weeks or whatever like that. I wasn't even on the show. And they said, well, he can't really travel that far to be there. And I said, we're going to be in Hershey in, 3 weeks. And the woman kind of got silent on the phone. I said, is he not expected to make it? And they said, we don't know. Days. He's got a number of days. So I said, would you like me to come visit him? And and then it was one of the most emotional phone calls I've ever been a part of, when she put me on a conference call with the mom and said, would it be okay if Mick Foley came to your house? And the woman was like, she's like, he's going to come here. She couldn't believe it, and the family couldn't have been nicer to me. And the time that I spent at the boy's house was very, very special to me. And he came to Hershey, and then everybody I let people know I had this special guest here, and he was really looking bad, and I'd been to the house. I knew the family didn't have a lot of money. And so when he said his mom said he could have a belt, I remember thinking, like, I don't know if she knows how expensive those belts are, So I mentioned to Bruce Pritchard, I said, Bruce, you think you guys are still looking to cut a little deal? I said, I'm going to buy Marco the belt. Do you think you guys could maybe cut me a little deal, And so he came back a couple minutes later. He goes, we're gonna take care of it. And so when they came out and they presented Marco with his belt, I mean, the mom she just started crying, And it turned out that she thought they were talking about a leather, Sears belt. She didn't realize they were talking about a championship belt, And this kid, I mean, it was I don't know, maybe some people had heard about it. It was like after the taping went off, Goldberg and Benoit came down, and then Austin came down, and we got the crowd to chant the kid's name. And it was one of those moments where you're just really proud to be part of the business, And 4 days later, I got a call from the mom, on the answering machine saying he passed away. She wanted to know if we'd mind if he was buried in the clothes that the guys had given him, And I mean, when you look back 20 years later, it's probably won't remember I don't think I'll remember a lot of the things that were considered to be big deals, you know, like the crowd, you know, huge crowds and dolls and things like that. But the fact that a family and a kid thought enough of you to want to be buried in your stuff is kind of staggering, you know. So we were at Penn State the next day, and I asked Vince if I could talk to the guys, you know. And I tell you, it was the hardest thing I'd ever done to get up there and actually talk to my peers about something important. I wanted them to know, you know, how proud they'd made me to be part of the business, and that it was just 30 guys all going out of their way for 5 minutes, you know, even 1 minute, 2 minutes, to take pictures with this kid and make it the time. Mother's was the greatest day in his life, and Ric Flair's included in that, you know, that he, 5 or 6 different occasions when I would to ask him, would you mind meeting a kid, always went out of his way, you know, and always was great with these kids. And when I was talking, you know, I was really choked up. And I looked at Flair, and Flair was all choked up, you know, and it was this great night for me in the business, because guys who didn't really know each other, like Shawn Michaels and me, for example. I wrestled Shawn, but I couldn't say I really knew him. And, you know, to have an avenue and to talk about things that are important like that was very rare in wrestling. And we're changing at the end of the night, and I said, and I'm looking at Flair, and I thought, you know, if there's ever a time to approach this, it's, you know, it's now. And I said, Rick, you know, I just wanted to talk to you about, you know, the things I wrote in my book. And he was like, don't even worry about it. And I apologized, I want to draw the distinction. I apologized if it hurt him. I didn't apologize for what I wrote, because what I wrote was is as true now as it was then. And he said, you know, that he never even read the wrestling books. As far as he was concerned, it was history. And what I said to him, I said, you know, it never occurred to me when I was that age that it could be anything but personal. I said, I've come to realize now that there are some people who just don't like my style, who never liked my style, but I could not see it any other way than that. Now I accept it. All right, you don't like it, that's fine, because there are other people that do. And he said, you know, his thing was, he said he didn't think that, he didn't think people realized how little power he actually had. But I did bring the subject up to him, and he dismissed it as if it was all in the past.
Okay.
And I think he lied about that.
All right. Before we get to the Flair stuff, okay, which we will get to in depth, because obviously you have a lot to say.
Why did I bring it up? What was the question?
The question was about if you wrote anything in the book.
Okay, Flair stuff. You know, this may sound stupid, but I went back, you know, and looking over what I had said about my WCW days. I hadn't read my book in a long. It's not like I need a good book to know mine, you know. But I mean, little things like saying, you know, when I was an independent, I had the best match in every show. I thought, that's probably not true. Plus, even if it was, a little, you know, a little ridiculous. It's just that I tried to have it. Little things like that. But if you gave me enough time to think about it, I might think of something I regretted. But no, I was happy with it. You know, I did exercise the right to take away stuff that made me sound like a complete jerk. And apparently that's a right that Ric Flair didn't exercise.
Is there anything that you did cut from the books that you now regret cutting from it? And this could be any of the books.
Not really. You know, in the novel, here's another thing I may end up posting, just because I think wrestling fans would like it. There's about 30,000 words about wrestling that are not in there anymore. And probably a lot of people watching the video didn't read the novel anyway. But, you know, it became a wrestling novel, you know, the story of the dad. And it was inspired by guys I had met along the way. And I remember asking Harley Race specifically about 6 months before I wrote the book to tell me about guys who thought they should have been higher than they were, especially smaller guys that never got to the point in the business they thought they should have been. And Harley started rattling off names and things. And so my experiences where I met the bitter wrestlers really inspired this main character in my book, and I did get a lot more into his wrestling past than I ended up making final print, and it was cool stuff. You know, I think people who really appreciate wrestling would like the story of this guy's adventures, but you know, it didn't make it.
What book are you proudest of, and why?
Oh man, you know, I mean, I'm proud of all of them. You know, the first one was great because specifically because I didn't think I was going to make any money on it. Nobody thought a wrestling book would sell, and it was just important to me. I realized my career was coming to a close, and I think that's what I have that so many guys don't have when they leave, is a sense that it's all wrapped up. You know, I have a sense of closure to my career. I can extend it here and there and do a match and get involved, but by and large, I did everything that I, you know, set out to do and more, and it's neatly encapsulated, you know, in that book. And from then on, there was always that feeling like I can make money off this, you know, like after the first one did so well, man, I couldn't wait to start that second one. I felt like the stuff I did at the PTC was really important to me, although it, you know, it wasn't that important in the book, and the book probably would have sold as many copies without the 6 months of studying. And this scene, the novel, yeah, I mean, that's great to be able to sit out. I want to write a novel and do that. But I believe it or not, this children's book means as much to me as any of them.
The one that's already out?
No, the one that's coming out.
Okay.
One that's coming out. Because I wrote it 4 years ago, it was like a struggle to, you know, it wasn't published when I thought it could have been. I knew kids liked it, and I've read it to literally, I was trying to figure out, it comes out to tens of thousands. I mean, not 60,000, 70,000, but between 10 and 20,000 kids have personally heard me read this story. And that's a lot of classrooms and camps and libraries, and there are times when I read it to 300 kids at a time, but it always gets over, no matter if the kids are wrestling fans or not. I've read it to 5-year-old kindergarten classes, and they like it as much as high school seniors who you think would be, you know, past at least accepting that they could enjoy a children's book. And there is, you know, there's money involved, but I just felt like there was a sign, like this was meant more than the money I was going to make, which was, I'll be honest, was $25,000. And so I'm giving the money to what I think is a very good cause. And it'd be one thing to give the money and say, okay, I'm through with that. But the fact that I'm going to go out and promote the book, knowing I can't make any money, that even if it sells 100,000 copies, I can't make a dime, makes me feel really good, because it makes me realize that maybe I didn't write the book for all the right reasons, but I'm promoting it for all the right reasons. And you know what, I found out that Bruce Springsteen read my Halloween book to his kids, you know, and I thought the idea that the boss is like spending time with his kids because of something I did is pretty cool. And the fact that, you know, the first book did almost 100,000 copies, the Christmas book. Halloween book did a lot less than that, but the fact that families are going out of their way to purchase something that will result in quality family time is a big deal. It's a lot bigger in that sense than the novel, because you have people who read novels, and you know what, if they weren't reading mine, they would read somebody else's, and somebody else is going to be, some of them will be as good and some of them will be better. But in the case of the children's book, I believe this is I'll go out and say, I believe it's a great children's book. And I believe it's got a positive message, and I think the fact that people go out of their way to read it to their kids is a big deal to me.
Okay. You mentioned the first book, nobody thought it would make money, and then it ended up, you know, being enormously successful. Does anyone within the wrestling industry, like any of the boys or anything, come up and maybe take you aside and give you any credit for opening the door to all these other books that have come out?
Yeah. They don't give me the credit, they give me the blame for it. Yeah, I think, you know, I've even been singled out, you know, in the acknowledgments. I think Missy Hyatt put it in her book, and Roddy Piper put it in his book. And I haven't read them all, so I don't know. I may have been, you know, Bill Goldberg gave me 10% of his book. No, but you know, the doors were opened. You know, I did open up the doors, you know, and maybe open them up a little too wide. But you know what? Edge called me up a couple of weeks ago and asked if I'd write the foreword to his book, and the foreword basically says that, you know, I was talking about a radio interview where I was asked how I wanted to be remembered, and I said, I thought about it, and I said, I want to be remembered for a guy that, you know, made people smile and who always treated the younger guys well. And so the foreword talks about the Edge, Christian, Foley stuff that I thought was, you know, I remember so fondly. And the idea that one of the guys who was breaking in when I was on top has now asked me to write his foreword is, you know, that kind of makes it all come around, you know. That I'm as proud of the way I treated the younger guys as I am of any big match I ever had.
Now, your first book had a lot of personal touch in it, as well as the wrestling things. Do you think that that personal touch is what got you over with the people as far as the book goes, or do you think it was more the wrestling end of things?
I think it was a combination. If the wrestling stuff hadn't been exciting, then that wouldn't have been what people wanted to read. They wanted wrestling. But I think, by and large, and this was not all positive in the sense that, overall, the book sold 750,000, hardcover, over 300,000, paperback, and I got to imagine that at least double the people read that through libraries and gifting and all, lending it. So you had 2 million people who were my friends, who knew me. It's not they thought they knew me, they did know me, but I didn't know them. And at one point it was kind of overwhelming. Like when that book came out, it was like, I remember, it was just like feeling like closed in, One of my biggest regrets is, that there would be that occasional person who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. A kid coming up to me, the National Baptist Convention was being held at King's Dominion in Virginia, and I was not having a good day. I was having a lousy day. I was at the park, but there were way too many wrestling fans. And looking back on it, the night before was my first match back against the Boss Man. I wrote about that. I stayed at the Best Western, which is like right across the street from King's Dominion. Looking back on it, I should have realized that staying at the closest possible place with your family when there's been a wrestling event nearby is not the way to go. We were hounded mercilessly the whole night, and then I got up to go to the park the next day, and I was having a bad day, and I'm carrying my family's food, and I've got, drinks here and things here. And one of the Baptist kids comes up and he goes, "Can I have your autograph?" And it was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I looked at my hands and I said, "With what? Like, how am I going to sign the autograph? You know what I mean? Like, get away from me." And then the kid really gets away, and then I sit down and I'm thinking about it, like, oh man, I sounded like a jerk there. And I remember looking for the kid, and it's hard to spot a kid in a yellow Baptist Convention t-shirt when there are 5,999 other people wearing the same damn shirt. So I remember that, and DDP met a guy who said, who told DDP he was the nicest wrestler he'd ever met. And DDP said, "Who was the worst?" And the kid said, "Me." And Dallas was trying to stick up for me. He was like, Mick's the best of the best. He said, "No, he was a jerk. He told me to get away from him." So there was that feeling at the time that I should have been enjoying it more than anything. Even when I was the commissioner, I remember like feeling like, man, like, like almost being paranoid, that, someone's going to kidnap my kids, and, it was like being a huge movie star without the movie star perks. You know what I mean? It was like, yeah, The Rock had the bodyguards, and I wasn't quite on the level that he was, but it was pretty damn big, and I used to sit around thinking, well, Ethan Hawke probably makes $5 million, and nobody knows who the hell he is, and we've got all this, not only the recognition, but the feeling that people actually knew me and liked me, and therefore felt comfortable coming up to me. I'd pass a family, waiting for the airplane, and they'd be wearing the Rock shirt, the Rock. And the Rock would get up, and he'd walk past, they'd go, "Hey, Rock." And then I'd walk past, and be like, "Mick, how are you?" They'd come up to me because they felt comfortable, which, looking back on it, I'm proud of. And now that wrestling has kind of flickered out a little bit, is a much more comfortable feeling having real wrestling fans coming up to you and talking to you than just, the bandwagon jumpers who, by and large, made the biggest deal out of you without really knowing much about the sport or the business.
Do you ever get any kind of reaction that the first book serves kind of like a handbook to maybe like aspiring wrestlers? Do you ever see that from anybody?
Yeah, I met a lot of people, especially I did an independent show in San Francisco area, and 3 different guys told me they decided to get into wrestling after reading that book. It's not what I wanted to happen, but I've had other people who've told me they've overcome obstacles in their life because of the book, so I don't want to. It's hard to take the credit for being positive when that means I'd also take the blame for guys making $10 payoffs in the independent scene. But yeah, it did. I guess it did affect people. Kind of
like the way, I kind of compare it to On the Road, the way that book is for that.
The Jack Kerouac book.
Yeah.
Foley and Kerouac are often lumped together historically. I guess so. Yeah, it made people want to go out and experience the country. Yeah, in some ways I can see that.
As far as with WWE going with the book, did they push you in any certain direction to trash people or put people over?
No, not at all. No, they were great. They never really said anything. I mean, the greatest conversation I had was after, I read the first chapters that the ghostwriter had done and was not happy with them. When I called up Jim Bell, who was the head of marketing at the time, and said, yeah, Jim, I'm not really happy with the book, and mentioned the guy's name. Well, get rid of him. We'll get you somebody else. And I said, well, actually, I was thinking of writing it myself. And I swear it must have been 30 seconds of dead air on the other end. He was like, oh, well, okay. And I said, how about if I write some pages and see if you like it? So I wrote 72 handwritten pages before I handed it in, thinking that I'd have a lot harder time rejecting a lot of work as opposed to a little work. But it turned out to be, the best thing that could have happened to me, because I had no idea what I was going to do with the rest of my life. Not that I'm going to write for the rest of my life, but it opened up the possibilities that I could do something else besides wrestling.
Do you still write everything out longhand?
Yeah, I do.
Do you keep all those pages?
I do keep the pages, yeah. I've got all the books I've written in longhand and notebooks.
How difficult was it to break into writing the novel with the stereotype of being a wrestler? Did you have a hard time being accepted?
Well, you know what, maybe accepted by my fellow authors. Few people I mentioned it sounded like I was whining, which I was. And there's an example of someone being me, should have looked at the work before I published it. By publishing, I mean faxing it to the Wrestling Observer. They're not being fair. I've had good reviews. You're not printing them. That type of thing. I could have just pointed that out, and done it in a form that didn't make me look like such a baby. But I did think that there were a few people, and I knew going in there'd be a few people who were going to take their shots at you. You're an easy target. You've had success in a business that they have dedicated a lot of their lives to. And here comes this wrestler guy, hey, I'm going to write my life story, and bam, it hits #1, and a follow-up does the same thing. And then I want to write a children's book, and I want to do a novel. And the doors were opening up easily for me. I was lucky that I was able to get a good agent, first time I'd ever had an agent, and that I found an editor who really believed in it, really pushed me, as a writer. But I don't think that... I think I deserved the entrance in, and I've taken my lumps along the way, but I'm glad I've done it.
Is the door now open for you to do another novel?
Well, I've got that one coming out in next.
It's now easier though, as far as dealing with the critics.
Well, this wasn't so easy, because if it hadn't been good and the sales were disappointing, quite frankly, Vince says that a lot, doesn't he? Quite frankly, in this very ring, quite frankly. If that book hadn't been really good, I don't think she would have taken it. It's not like she felt an obligation to publish the second novel. And I had to rewrite it twice, make major changes and do a lot of rewriting, and then she ended up really liking it. I'm not expecting it to do great, but I'm going to enjoy it because I have the realistic, goals. And I'm going to travel a little bit and support it. And I have a few other stories in mind that I may or may not get to.
Well, a while ago there was talk about the first book becoming a movie. Is there still any talk about a screenplay happening?
I met with somebody a few months ago, and my feeling on it is there is a really good movie in there, I think, but it would have to be a short period of time. It's in this, and I use the two movies about Wyatt Earp as an example. Say there were two competing movies. I don't know why they went Wyatt Earp crazy, but there was Wyatt Earp, the A to Z biography by Kevin Costner that he starred in, and there was Tombstone, which took the period of time everyone cared about, the gunfight in the OK Corral, and by and large, people, they panned the Wyatt Earp movie, even though it was well made, and they loved Tombstone. That's the way I feel about my story. An A to Z biography would do so little justice to any one period. Whereas if you took, like, the King of the Deathmatch tournament and made that the basis of the movie and used, there's some great cinematic devices in there, I think, like the coming back from the match all, bathed in blood and finding out there's no drinks in the dressing room and having to get fans to go to the soda machine, and the little touches like that. It's the asking for a bonus after you've had 42 stitches, or will have 42 stitches and burns, and being thrown a can of soda and being told, here's your bonus. It's putting down the big trophy, turning your back and never seeing it again. It's walking to the hospital. all those things I think would make for a good movie. You'd have to be careful not to make it like a, look at me, this is what you can do. It'd have to be somewhat of a cautionary tale, and of course the happy ending would be the phone call from the WWF, But I do think there's something there. It wouldn't break my heart if it wasn't done. Will Sasso, the actor, really wanted to interpret it. And I talked to him a few times, and I was saying that, well, if everything was right and this and that, and I don't know if he thought that by saying if everything's right, that I meant if you guys pay me a lot of money, which is what I did mean. But it might get done, it might not, but it would make a good story.
Switching gears and looking at Beyond the Mat, do you feel that you were portrayed accurately in Beyond the Mat?
Blaustein buried me. No, I'm kidding. I was. That was me, That was me. I didn't realize, I thought I was, I didn't realize I had so many, little faults, and quirks, and people would say, how did he really got you, that, and I was definitely not far from perfect, but I think I came across pretty well. Al Snow and I were at the debut of The End of Days, the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, and there were a group of women that were whispering and looking at me. It turned out they were people from Universal Studios who had screened the movie, an advanced screening. They didn't know me as a wrestler, they knew me as a dad, and they thought I was this awesome. They realized I wasn't a perfect dad, but they thought that I, they liked me based on the movie. Yeah, I love the movie, and certain people in the company did not.
I guess that you answered my next question, which was, are you proud or are you glad that you took part in the project?
Yeah, I am glad, and you know what? At the time when he got a hold of me, which was '95, I thought that was going to be my legacy in the business. Vince wasn't. I think I'd talked to Jim Ross several months earlier and just let him know, hey, if anything comes up and it's the right spot, I'd be interested. But I wasn't counting on a big move at all. I thought that my role was to be the guy who had once been a star, not the washed-up guy, but a guy who had gone, because they had a couple other guys who fit that bill, but guys who had, who were past their prime.
Now, asking the obvious follow-up question to what you said earlier, who and why weren't they happy that you took part in the movie?
Vince thought I was a downer. Vince believes firmly that what we do, is he believes that, aside from curing diseases, that entertaining people is the most important thing we can do. And he thinks looking behind the curtain like that at some sensitive subjects and some sad subjects hurts the viewer's ability to enjoy the show. Now, that makes me wonder why when WWE did a documentary, the Mania Behind WrestleMania, they made it far more depressing and far sadder than anything that that Barry did. I mean, there was not a moment of happiness in WrestleMania Mania Behind the Mania. I thought it was a great documentary, but man, there was no levity there. It was guy facing, it was. And our thing, Jake had his problems, to be sure. Terry Funk was looking at the end of his career. I was looking at the end of my career. You were looking at two guys simultaneously who were looking at possible paralysis, and then a third guy who almost became paralyzed, and that guy being Brock. So I thought that was a very sobering look at the business done by the company. But I do know that when we were at the convention in Boston, we're walking down the street and we're talking about something, and Stacy Keibler meant to say, the day before my interview, I saw Beyond the Mat. And she's got the sentence out, and then we come to a red light, and I quickly turned, she was telling this to Linda, and I quickly turned to Stacy, one of the many times I whispered in her ear, and I said, Linda hates Beyond the Mat. Oh! So that was the last that was ever spoken of. And so she asked me why does she hate it? I thought it was good. I said, they think it's sad, they think it hurts the business, hurts the fans' ability to enjoy the business.
What did you think when you saw the part when you were on the answering machine and were kind of incoherent? What did you think of that part when you watched it?
I didn't think I sounded that incoherent, other than the fact I said I couldn't remember most of it, which I didn't, and I have come to remember all of it except actually being knocked out. Still, the only thing I recall is the first thing I remember was going up to the choke slam. I vaguely remember the feeling of going through it like a hot knife through butter, and I remember feeling that some of my teeth were missing, and turning around and seeing Terry Funk's sneakers in the ring and having no idea how they got there. Sneakers in the ring was my first recollection.
Okay. While we're on the subject of the Hell in the Cell match, the famous one with the dive, do you think that dive has reached people and influenced them the way that the Schnooka dive off the top of the cage did for you? Like, would this be this generation's version of the Schnooka dive?
Yeah, probably. Did you say Schnooka?
Schnooka.
Schnooka? Schnooka. Yeah, I think it has. I think the most amazing thing about that night was that 240,000 people fit into a 20,000 seat arena. That everybody I meet says they were at that match. I mean, I've probably met 10,000 people who told me personally they were at the match. Some of them are probably telling the truth, and I think other people just they think they were there. Like, and I've heard that is that's a common psychological occurrence where people think something so much it becomes true to them. And I think that's the case, that the people see that as a legitimate history in our business, like a great moment in history, and they want to have been there.
Do you think the way that your dive kind of took Schnooka's dive to the next level, that there might be somebody in the future that might try to even top that? And then
it's going to be tough, because I think people physically have topped it, but they haven't done it in situations like that where it makes as big of an impact. And I think, unfortunately, for anyone trying, like Shane took like the 50-foot bump, and was on a crash mat, but still took an awful lot of guts. Get up there, he'd practice it over and over. And can I tell you my lowest moment in the WWE? This is a classic. I made it a habit when I was a commissioner to go raid Vince's office when everyone else was out watching watching TV and the monitor, and there weren't that many guys who had access to the office anyway, so it wasn't like all the boys were in there, but I was welcomed in there, and I would always go in, raid the office, and Vince always had good stuff to eat. He'd always have steaks or chicken or great Chinese food and all that, and that was part of my deal. I'd come in, it wasn't something I negotiated, it was just a little perk that I would go in and steal Vince's food. And I went in and chose to raid Vince's office right after Shane had taken that bump. And we all knew he was okay, but imagine being his mom and you see your son drop 50 feet, I walked in and Linda was in Vince's office crying. And the correct move to make would have been, I'm sorry, Mr. McMahon, and leave. The move I made was, I'll just be a second. I got a plate out while she was eating, while she was crying. Hold on a second. Okay, bye, Mr. McMahon. And I took off. And I remember, I couldn't really enjoy the meal because I realized what a dick I am. Did I really just take food while Shane's mom was distraught? And yes, I did do that.
What kind of influence do you think you've had on today's hardcore style with the light tubes?
Probably too much. Yeah. I mean, I'd like to say I had no influence, and I do think there was a difference, in what I did. For the most part, certainly I've been in situations where, I did do garbage wrestling just for the sake of it, because it's what I was paid to do, and there were opponents, that just weren't that good at it, and if you're in a 4 or 6 man and there's everything going on, you really can't control the content too much. At its best, I thought the stuff I did in the hardcore atmosphere was really good, and like I said, a really wild form of artistic, of art. But there were times, when I did stuff just because it was there and just because I was paid to do, and I usually felt less of myself because of it. There were little moments like even after I'd had a good match with the Sandman in a barbed wire match in Florida, when it was over, people were throwing beer cans into the ring and garbage, and it was I was very uneasy with the feeling. It was that animal in a zoo feeling, and there's only been a handful of times that I felt that way. And I'm not knocking what other people think they have to do, especially if they have a family to feed. But if those guys think that that's their door to stardom, I would just say to them, look, I was arguably the best guy in the world at one point at doing that particular form of wrestling. And it really wasn't that great a living. It was $3,000 a week, $3,000 a week, 17 weeks a year. And during the time you're not wrestling, there's an awful lot of pain involved. And man, I have a friend who, as a conductor on the Long Island Railroad, it makes double that. So when you say, hey, you can be the best in the world at this really ridiculously painful and dangerous form of art, and you're not going to make a killing. You might be able to do it for a couple of years, and after that, your body's filled with scars, your body's broken down, and all you can do is brag about who you used to be.
Do you think that the hardcore wrestling today, where it's just really in excess, do you think they've kind of lost sight of that art form?
Yeah, in some ways. I mean, even when WWE had their the hardcore title, when they started resorting like hitting each other with watermelons and things like that, hardcore made how can we hit each other with many wacky things as possible and get into as many weird places as possible. I thought they did lose sight of it. I always try to keep it in the context of what can I do to win this match available to me. And believe it or not, not one of my favorite things, but something I liked doing was when I was set up by whoever happened to be in charge at that time, and I was in a handicap match against the Acolytes, a hardcore handicap match. I kept going under the ring for stuff, and it turned out to be stuff that wasn't dangerous, trying to hit him, and to me, like, that made sense. Like, you're trying to use stuff and it's not there, but and he's going under the ring, oh, he's got a watermelon, little things like that where you just happen to have a potpourri of objects under there. Granted, at Backlash I pulled out the barbed wire board, but that's because I knew it was a hardcore match and therefore was not beyond, believing that I might have planted a couple of things. But yeah, sometimes, there are times when I think they lose sight of it. And there are also other times when hardcore can be used as comedy, and I make no apologies for that, because I will always believe in the salad tongs to the nuts as a weapon. I will believe in double salad tongs as a weapon. I will believe in heels standing on their tiptoes as a valuable form of family entertainment. I'll defend that to my death. Yeah, that's good stuff. But I tried not to use that when it came to doing the big pay-per-views.
Okay. Looking at the DVD WWE released of your career, what do you think of the DVD?
I thought it was good. I wish I'd had more of a hand in it. I was made aware of it. Obviously, I did the wraparounds. But I was basically given a list of matches and told, what do you think of these? And like even with the Sandman match that was so dreadful, which is not to say we didn't have good matches. We did have some. But I even said on the thing, this is not one of them. And decided to keep it in there just so people could see what a rotten match looked like. I wish and it does say the Hardcore Legend picked these out himself. In some cases I did. I'd say, how can we put this on? And we made the match with Sting, DVD extra, and the Sabu match where he hurt his ribs was a DVD extra. But what I wish I'd done, I didn't have much time, what I wish I'd done is gone through, like my book, for example, and found stories I told that had video clips that pertained to them and aired them. Like there's a story about where I was supposed to be cutting the promo and showing Sting what I would be doing to him. And we're going to do that by showing me destroying a wooden crate. And my idea was, Dusty said, I'm not sure, Daddy. No, he didn't say, Daddy, what we want you to do, we know we don't want you to kick it. And I said, Dusty, what if I drop a big headbutt through there? Can you do that, baby? I said, oh, yeah, I can do that. And now they cut out the back part of it. They didn't want me going through there and catching my neck or my head on the back thing. So it was a three-sided crate. And all I thought about was going through that, visualized it. Like I knew I was going to go through that crate. No question I was going to break right through it. I never thought about what would happen to my head after it went through that crate. I mean, it just bounced like a basketball off the concrete floor. And I told the story, and I'm assuming it's a pretty good story to listen to, but it would have been great to see me there. Supposedly cutting this fired up promo on Sting, and instead I hit the ground and I sit up on my ass and I go, and then JR's like, he's a dangerous man, I wish I had little clips like that. And I wish I had, the Flair thing is really well thought out, not just the matches, but there's a lot of clips. And, with Benoit's story, I haven't seen it, but I understand guys are talking about him. And I think they were done, and I'm sorry to say, because the guy who did my DVD is the same guy who did Hard Knocks and Cheap Pops and Three Faces of Foley, and I think he did a great job on those. But I think we could have done a little more justice to a career retrospective.
What is your opinion of the media coverage that you get? Not the wrestling media, but the mainstream media.
The mainstream media. Can you give me an example?
Well, I know that there's the famous example where they switched the clip on you.
Oh yeah, man. Oh, I know the correct way to say it's more fake than wrestling, but it's faker than wrestling. Yeah. Yeah, switching the clip, even 2020's guy told me a year later that we should have sued them. You know, at the very least, gotten the great retraction. We are sorry that we aired a video that did not coincide. Yeah, what they did, just for the people who don't know, is they showed me a clip of some guys wrestling in the backyard, dropping elbows on each other and so forth. And they used a cheese grater or a light bulb and said, "What do you think about that?" And I said, "Well, I've seen worse than this, and I have a feeling you're going to show me worse than this in a second, aren't you?" And they went, "Yeah." And I said, "But I wasn't so crazy about the cheese grater or light bulb, whichever it was. But for the most part, that looked like a bunch of guys having fun." And then they switched to guys getting torn up with barbed wire and doing ridiculous things. And then I said, "Well, that's ridiculous. They shouldn't be doing that type of stuff." And they switched my answer from the first video, became my answer for the second video, and made me look like a heartless SOB. And that type of thing goes on all the time, though. I try to stay away from soundbite media, because especially for a guy like me who prides himself on telling both sides of the story, they will take the side of the story that they want. And I think Behind the Lines, or whatever the ESPN show was, did that to some extent, and that they interviewed me for a couple of hours and just picked and chose what they wanted to use, so that when they asked me about the Val Venus thing, I said, "Well, that wasn't one of my favorites," and then I said, and ratings showed that it wasn't one of the audience favorites, and we've learned that those type of things are not ratings bonanzas for us anyway. And they just had me saying, "Well, that wasn't one of my favorites," which isn't a great example, but that type of thing happens all the time. I mean, you see it now in the current political campaign, where guys are attacked because of something they voted on 15 years ago without any further backstory as to why they voted that way, which other people voted that way, and they just depend on the viewer not knowing or not caring. And in wrestling's case, I think it may have been a little worse, because they didn't think that we were people who deserved the benefit of the doubt. And I used a journalist like Margaret Carlson of Time magazine and the Capital Gang, referring to The Rock as being anti-gay and anti-black. And that's why I said in the book, "Margaret, I don't know how to tell you this, but The Rock's black, could you imagine if she said that about Colin Powell or somebody of equal African-American ancestry? That should be fired." But because it was about wrestling, there was really there was no reaction.
When you're not actively in WWE right now, do you follow the business, or do you follow anything besides WWE?
I wish I'd followed it closer. I'll admit to not following SmackDown that closely. I do watch Raw, and the nice thing about it is you can watch the show and get work done at the same time. You don't have to dedicate 2 hours. You can read a book, or you can do your bills and just tune in when you want. I wish that I followed the independent scene better, because I feel it's almost like my duty as a guy who, for some reason, and I know the reason, because of the books, I think it's made me seem like an expert on the business, like an acknowledged, expert, and therefore I should know who's coming up and what CM Punk and AJ Styles do, and I vaguely do, but not nearly on the level that I should. And I'm looking at the bed at about 16 different DVDs that you guys have for me, so I will attempt to come in there, and I will attempt to know the guys, soon.
Do you enjoy doing indie shows now, or is it like a step down just for a payday?
No, I do enjoy it. I was concerned that it would be a step down for a payday, but I've had a good time doing it. For the most part, I think the fans like that, personal interaction that they can't get at the bigger shows, and I get to see, the younger guys, and I haven't really pursued the independents, so in most cases I've done them. I've only been a dozen or so. They're guys that I worked for years ago, and in some cases I'm doing them a favor, and in a lot of cases making out pretty well. One of the reasons I had for being hesitant was that I didn't want to be taking money out of the boys' pockets. But I've been told on certain guaranteed shows that they can't run the show unless the sponsors have a name they want. So in the case where, all right, I'm making good money, but there wouldn't be a show if I wasn't on it, I don't feel so bad about it. And I do feel like a jerk for selling pictures, because I know if I was on the receiving end, especially when you're told, no, you can't have that piece of paper, son, you got to pay for it. I would think I would think less of the guys. So what I'm attempting to do, and what I am doing in the next several, is I'm donating that money. There's still that part of me that grew up in the business, where you've got to take what you can and to push aside $1,000, to not go out there and work for 20 minutes for it is counter, to everything that, I broke in about. And so I've realized, it'd be good to take the money, but then donate it to, some people who could use it.
What was your reaction when Terry Funk wanted you to write the foreword for his upcoming book?
Oh man, that was awesome. Yeah, I haven't done it yet, but I'm trying to think of the right words. I'll call him. I'll see what kind of time schedule I'm on. But it's in the same. It's different. It's a different feeling than Edge. Probably bigger honor even to do the Funkers. One I think speaks. I'd like to think it speaks well of me in the way I treated the younger guys. But to have a guy like Funk, consider me to be, in that upper echelon of wrestlers means a lot to me.
Yeah. Do you think you can influence more people by wrestling or writing?
Well, I don't think I can influence them by writing. The writing is really valuable. Like if I want to speak to a school or even to do college speaking, which I get paid for, it makes me a credible speaker. You know what I mean? And even like. I guess in 3 days I'm going to go on the Air America show. Since I was at the convention, they want to talk to me about the Smack on Your Vote thing. And it certainly gives you a credibility that you wouldn't otherwise have to say, hey, he's a wrestler and he's written 2 #1 bestsellers. Wouldn't be JR introducing me on Air America, even though I just did JR's voice. But it gives you a certain, credibility that wrestling couldn't.
What was it like being at the Democratic National Convention recently?
It was. I liked it. I understand that the wrestling fans, a lot of them couldn't care or really don't want the guys, taking political sides. That's not why they like them. But this is something Vince feels strongly about, and I'll be honest. I thought our show leaned a little too heavily in one direction, and I did think there should be a little countering to that. And so I know there are
political wise.
Yeah. Yeah, and I understand why it's a lot easier to do a gay angle than it is to do a healthcare angle, and I've done the stuff. And I think I do it pretty well. Like when Kurt Angle went out there and he said, "I don't even know what your wife sees in you. If I was married to you, I wouldn't." And I said, "What did you say?" And he was like, "What?" Back, but did you say if you were married to me, Kurt? Is that something you think about? And then that's such easy stuff, and it's not mean-spirited. And I think even the stuff that Billy and Chuck did before they ruined it all, where they'd be stretching their legs and talking about how, their legs are sore from doing all that marching, which would lead anyone, who follows politics or social events to think, there must have been some kind of gay march, And then when you find out there was a gay march, you kind of pat yourself on the back and you realize how clever that is. So I don't have anything against, doing that type of thing. But I did think that we were giving the fans the idea that our show was really was very, and I don't think that's indicative of. So I don't think the fact that I believe differently has hurt me in the past. I think if you lined up 10 pictures of WWE wrestlers and you said one of these guys, worries about kids starving in foreign countries, that most of the fans go, that's got to be Foley, because they're not going to think that Austin gives a damn or that Undertaker really cares, So I think the fact that I did care about people and the fans helped me, and they may not like it in their face, they may not like me airing my views, but I've got 4 kids and I don't like the idea of living in the world, under the vision that our current president has for us. And I just worry that, that the day after the election, should he be elected, that I could be sitting there thinking I could have done something. So I'm more than prepared to lose a few fans along the way. But I don't think our liberal fans dislike Austin because he hunts deer, and I don't think that most of our conservative fans will dislike me because, I made a little stand. But I thought we were doing something important, and I'm glad that I went.
What kind of reaction did you get from people there? Did they take you seriously with the wrestling background?
You know what? I got the feeling they may not have taken us that seriously to begin with, we were standing there, and of course, if you don't really know wrestling, Big Show is the guy you're going to notice. Even if you do know wrestling, he's the guy you're going to notice. We were wandering around that first day, well before the big speeches started, and I noted that people are looking at us, oh, there's the wrestlers, that type of thing, and it was really former Senator Max Cleland. He's the guy that lost 3 legs in Vietnam and was still painted as a coward by his political opponent who beat him because of painting that way. But the guy is really held in high regard by most people on either sides of the aisle. And I saw him and I introduced myself. And I didn't realize he was getting ready to do an interview, so there was a press corps right there. I said, excuse me, Senator Cleland, I'm Mick Foley from WWE. And he went, Mick! And he gave me a big hug, with that arm, really. And he was like, hold on a second, let me get you in a headlock. And he turned around and all the cameras were clicking away. And they put that on the front page of the style section of the Washington Post. And I felt like it legitimized us being there. And then when I did have a chance to air, my views, I got the sense that, among that little press corps, that they were impressed that I obviously pay some attention to it and that I do have opinions. So they may not have, and by and large, a lot of people think it's probably ridiculous. But I think to a minority of the people, which may be all that matters in this election, that it is important.
Do you think it's important or do you look at it as like you're trying to play a role where you're increasing the respect that people have for the wrestling industry through your writing and through doing things like at the convention? Like, some people might look down on wrestling and go, oh, all wrestlers are a bunch of idiots. But by you being involved in these kind of things, do you think that maybe you're raising people's respect for wrestling?
That's not the intention, but it might be true. One thing, and I mentioned this to Linda, and I mentioned this to Gary Davis, and I think it's going to happen. And this was based on me having a political debate with Val Venus in the dressing room. And Val's a great guy, but he's got some weird views, And he and I were going back and forth, and it wasn't like it was an ugly debate, but we finished, and I think he had to go wrestle, and I was like, hey, this is fun. I said, we should talk to Vince about bringing the wrestlers around colleges and doing like a debate, have like, Chris Nowinski, who knows his stuff, and is certainly left to where I am, and then Val Venus, who is so far to the right side that that even Pat Buchanan's saying, what's with this guy, and maybe someone else who's got some conservative views. I brought up Flair, and I told Gary Davis, I said, if they want to see me and Flair together, I won't work with them in a ring, but I'll shoot with them in a political debate, and I think that's been rejected. But I believe we're going to try to do something the day before the first presidential debate in Miami. And the nice thing about it, when I mentioned to Linda and Gary, I said, you know what, the bar is set so low for us, people expect so little out of wrestlers, that if we can just come across being moderately intelligent and informed, then we've done so much more than anybody has expected from us. So I think we benefit in that way. As much as I'd like to be, for example, respected as being a real author, I also realized that I wouldn't be on some of these shows unless I wasn't a wrestler first. And I think I came across some person who actually said, hey, aren't you the writer? And it stuck in my mind. It was the first time anyone had ever said that. So I could bang my head against the wall and say, I'm a writer, damn it, but I'll always be a wrestler first. And I think I really began to appreciate that, back when I did the angle with Hall and Hunter, that not only was I admitting to being a wrestler, but I was proud of it as well.
Have you read Ric Flair's book, To Be the Man?
What is it?
Ric Flair's new book, To Be the Man.
Do you have a book out? I have read Ric Flair's book. Yeah, I caught up with Bill after, I think I mentioned this on the plane, and he had the book. So I asked if I could read it, and I read it in one night. In my hotel, I stayed up to about 5 in the morning reading To Be the Man.
Well, what critiques do you have of the book?
With one exception, I kind of liked it. With one big exception, I did like it. I didn't think it was great. I think some people are giving it too much credit, being great. To me, it read a little bit like a Cliff's Notes version of Ric Flair's career. Like just the extent of his career, how much it entails, works against it a little bit, because you can't do justice to everything, especially when they basically want, a 60, 70,000 word book. I'm not sure how many words in there, but they don't want an overly long book. In my case, I had to really fight because mine was so damn long, but that's not what they wanted. I think one of the drawbacks is that he never made me feel like I knew what was going through his mind during any of these big matches. Like he never really brought me into the matches, even matches that were great and historic for him, like the matches with Steamboat. I think he covers the 2 out of 3 falls match in a paragraph. I don't think he gives any more than a paragraph to the Nashville or Chicago matches, and not much to Vader either. And that was a huge match when he won, was it Starrcade in '93? I mean, that was a huge match emotionally. He talks about the emotions afterwards, but he never made me feel like I knew what it was like to be Ric Flair. So that was one drawback. And I'd say in its credit, I also wondered how. One thing that worked for my book is there was an arc, almost like a movie. You're building up for this big thing, and all this, the sacrifice had gone through, and then bam, I win the championship. And it's like, how are you going to do that with a guy who's won the championship 16 times? And I think what he did, what was effective, is that his kind of career resurgence in WWE after feeling down and after being kicked around, he was able to come back, and that match with Triple H was kind of like a championship moment for him. So to his credit, I actually found myself rooting for him, even though I can't stand him. So I think it was pretty good. But there were some things that were not well researched, concerning me that make me think that and I've been told that the parts on me specifically were added after the fact and done specifically to create controversy. And I think when you're Ric Flair and you've had arguably the greatest career of all time, that you're doing a disservice to yourself by creating false controversy. That if someone reads Ric Flair's book and comes away from it thinking about me, then he has not done himself justice. And in that sense, I think in the bigger picture, yeah, maybe the controversy has sold some copies. Maybe if I'd played along like they wanted me to, that it would have helped. But the sad part of it is, if he had treated me with the least little respect, that I'd probably be in training to work with Ric Flair right now, because that's something we had talked about a lot before I left. It was something I thought we were both looking forward to. But I can't work with someone who doesn't respect me.
Now, the part that you're referring to is where it looked like that it was Flair's response to you calling him a bad booker.
Yeah.
Why in the opening pages of your book did you call Flair a bad booker?
Oh, because he was a bad booker.
How come you chose
a very naughty bad booker? Because I was talking, in my book I was talking about. I started out with the match I had with Vader, and the fact that I had a long talk with Flair that night before the match, and Flair was going to turn me heel, and his justification for that was saying, and I won't do the Ric Flair imitation, it's not that good, it's certainly not flattering to him, and I don't want people to think I'm trying to make fun of him here, because I'm not, but his justification was that Vader and I had the most brutal matches he'd ever seen, and when I came back, it didn't boost the ratings, so that was evidence to him that nobody cared about me as a babyface, and that I would need to be a heel. He said I talk like a heel, I work like a heel, and that was his decision. And had I not lost my ear that night in Munich, I would have been turned heel. It would have been a lackluster heel turn, and so actually losing my ear turned out to be a blessing in disguise.
So it was more that tied into the beginning of the book rather than you were looking to take a shot at.
Yeah, I wasn't looking at. I would have taken shots at him later on, but that definitely tied into it. But I would say that because I don't think, and he admits it was not. He says he'll admit he wasn't a good booker. I don't know. Maybe you find the quote there. He says I'll admit I was not a good booker because wrestling always came first. That's a huge point. I don't think people realize it. When you're a booker, you're holding other people's fate in the palm of your hands. And I think if there was a job description that said you, Ric Flair, will be in charge of your own destiny as a wrestler, and you will never have anything to do with any other wrestler's storyline, life, therefore family, then you won't. I think he would have grabbed that in a second. I think he wanted to be the booker, and even though he will never go out and say he was the booker, he kind of relieves himself, absolves himself of any guilt whatsoever associated even with Steve Austin's departure and people that he had a direct impact on. He was the booker in two different instances in my life. You know, from when I joined WCW in '89 until he left as the booker. He was still part of the company. I think he left in April of '90, and then he was the booker from I'm trying to think, December of '93 until at least after I left in September of '94. And I don't think he took a lot of pride or even interest in creating characters and storylines, because I've worked with people that have, and I mean from Eric Embry in Dallas to Robert Fuller in Continental to guys I work with like Cornette and Kevin Sullivan in WCW, to Paul E, to Dusty. They get a sparkle in their eyes when they talked about doing angles, about creating storylines. And I didn't have that much personal interaction with Flair. Usually, especially in my first stint in WCW, you know, I think it was Sullivan and Cornette coming up with the ideas, specifically Sullivan. But I never got the feeling that not only was wrestling just secondary, but I never got the feeling that he cared that much at all about creating storylines or stars.
Do you think it was more Flair wanted the ego boost of being called Booker, and he was just concentrating on himself?
I don't think it was the ego boost. I think it was the fact, maybe in the beginning, maybe in '90 with Hurd, but I think he saw being the Booker in '94 as an act of self-preservation. He had been screwed around a lot, and I think he saw that being the Booker was the only way he could make sure that he wasn't screwed around with more. That's just my feeling. I'm not sure.
What are your feelings about WWE marketing the Flair book around the negative comments he made about you and Bret?
Well, the Bret stuff shouldn't have been in there at all. I don't know if Ric Flair knows that Bret Hart had a stroke. Maybe I'll tell him Bret Hart had a stroke. To comment on Owen's death and to really imply that it didn't mean much or as much to Bret as his career did is underhanded, and it's bush league, and Bret deserves better, and Flair, I think, is the worst of himself to come out in a book. That's part of the benefit of writing a book. You can actually go back and see where you look like a dick and change it. And apparently he felt strongly enough about the controversy it would create, or maybe he honestly felt that way, to include it. And again, I in some ways I look at it as a compliment to me that arguably, I'll never call him the world's greatest wrestler, but he was arguably the world's greatest wrestler, and he was certainly up in that class in my eyes. That he writes a book about his career and has people talking about me, that's flattering in an odd type of way. I didn't agree with WWE wanting to capitalize on that. If it had worked out the way that they wanted it to, this video would be marketed by WWE. But as a dad, I don't believe in rewarding bad behavior, so I don't like, on principle, the idea of Ric Flair making money off my comments about his book. But I'm doing this because I don't mind if I make money off my comments about Ric Flair's book.
Have you and Bret talked about what Flair said?
Yeah. Bret and I have talked, and I'm very flattered that he stood up for me. I wish he hadn't have said that he thought I was a better worker than Flair, because I wasn't, A, and B, I think his anger took away some of his credibility. I think he should have been a given. Okay, Flair's a great wrestler, but he should not have said this stuff about Bret Hart. Bret was, he was just so damn mad, that he couldn't help himself.
Did you and Bret normally talk, or was it just kind of out of the blue?
I have kept in contact with Bret.
So it wasn't unusual that he would call you about this, or you would call him about this?
We're not in constant contact. He was calling me about this. But we have talked on once a year or so. I have a, nice talk with Bret. He's a guy I respect a great deal.
Were you surprised when you heard what Ric Flair wrote about you?
Yeah, I was. It's funny because actually I read about the comments he made in England, and I swear that
for those people watching, what were the England comments?
English comments, that was, overrated, and that it was basically what he said here. Just a couple of odd
and that was
things.
What, like 6 months ago?
No, this was right before Backlash.
Okay.
What really bothered me about the comments was that they were made. I was asked, can I go promote Backlash in England? And I would have loved to have done it, but I had a couple of commitments, so they sent Flair. Now, if his job, as I see it, is to promote the pay-per-view that I was a major part of. I'll go out on a limb and I'll say that I consider me and Randy to be the main event. If Hunter and Sean and Chris think they were the main event, that's fine. But it was certainly a co-main event, promoted that way. And to me, that's like, finding out, hey, someone telling Quentin Tarantino, hey, great news, we got Steven Spielberg. He's going to go out to England, he's going to promote Kill Bill. And then while Spielberg is out there, he talks about what a piece of crap Tarantino is and how bad the acting is, but hey, go see the movie anyway. That's not his job. He said his job was to be honest. Certainly, there are a lot of ways you can be honest without completely burying the guy in there. I mean, he could have said, well, Mick Foley, that's not my style of wrestling, even if he said I think he was overrated, but hey, the guy, he's going to be a great match at Backlash because that's his specialty. He may not be the greatest. There are 100 ways you could get across your point without completely burying me. But the funny part is, when I first read this, Flair was in England and talking about how Foley was overrated. My first feeling was, all right, cool. Yeah, he's doing our angle, because he and I had done this great interview, at least I thought it was great, in Baltimore. Arn Anderson said he thought it was great. And it revolved around the idea, the word legend being used too liberally, and that really, by one standard, there's a group of like 10 all-time greats. And once you start allowing me in that group, then you can allow 150 other guys, you know what I mean? And so the fans ultimately decide who's a legend in their eyes. But among the peers, I'm not in that class that Ric Flair is. And that was what that interview was about, and I thought we could have done a hell of a storyline revolving around that, and we would talk about it. Like I said, it was something we looked forward to doing. So my first reaction was, all right, he's doing the storyline, and then it was, where would he been if he hadn't fallen on tacks? And it kept getting worse and worse, and literally I was thinking, all right, that's enough. You got your point across. You're probably overdoing it now. And even when I called up Johnny Ace, the reporter, they called it a complaint. Yes, I was complaining. But I also wanted to find out if he was working an angle. Because there are guys who work angles without informing the guy they're working with that they're working. And so really when Ace, he left a message, and I thought it was going to be, hey, Rick wants you to know you have to respect, and he just wants to do the angle. And Johnny instead was like, yeah, Rick, he said he was telling the truth. He doesn't think you're very good. He said you were an attraction and drew money, but as a wrestler, he didn't think very much of you. He actually said a lot worse than that about me. And then so I had some clue about the book, and it was Ann Russo Gordon, who works in talent relations, called me up and said, Rick made some comments in the book. We want to fax it to you and see if you can return comments for the Raw magazine. And I said, Ann, I'm not really sure. If I hadn't been aware of the English comments, I would have said, yeah, sure, fax it. And then I probably would have been mad, and I would have written some stuff, and it would have helped out their angle. But I had time to think about it, and I said, I'm not sure I feel comfortable helping out a guy who buried me. And she said, what, you want some time to think about it? I said, no, I just did. I'm not really interested in doing anything with Ric Flair or his book. I was at Walter Reed Medical Center when I got that call, so I was in visiting a soldier who had broken his back in Iraq when Shane called. And maybe I shouldn't be talking about this, but what the hell. And so Shane called, and he started saying, hey, we want to do this thing. We know controversy sells. I said, Shane, first off, I said, I'm in the room with a soldier, who broke his back. He's been through a lot. He might enjoy this conversation. He was a wrestling fan. And Shane said, oh, yeah, sure. And so that young soldier got a pretty good conversation.
Put on speakerphone?
No, I did have it on speakerphone. I did have it on speakerphone. And when I went back to see him like a month later, he was like, oh, that was awesome. It wasn't like Shane and I were fighting. But Shane said controversy sells, and when I said, Shane, I know controversy sells, that's why I'm not going to be a part of it. He goes, but Rick would love to work with you. And I said, Shane, I would have loved to have worked with Rick too. I said, but he buried me. He didn't give it a criticism. He didn't, it wasn't anything that was, well thought out. He just buried me. And I said, you have to have some respect for your opponent. You don't have to like him. You might think he's overrated, but you have to have some form of respect for him, or else you can't work together. And I do think, that in some ways, I do still think that he was working, in some respect. I'm sure he means some of what he said. I'm sure he thought that it would help sell the book, which it has, and I think he thought he'd get a hell of a program out of it with me. If he didn't think there was a match to be had, I don't think he would have gone so far out. I don't think, the person responsible for inserting the story going back over it. You know, because there were criticisms, like I said, but they specifically went back and redid that story to make it look far worse than it had been. And in some ways, I feel bad for him because in the letter I wrote to him, which I guess he's pretty bitter about, I said, we could have worked, and you took the one guy who could have put you back on top, and you spit on his face. You know, this is after I talked about what an honor it was to, see him up close, and the passion he had for the business should serve an example for everyone from top superstar to the youngest rookie. And the last thing I said was, I'm very thankful that you and your opinion of me no longer have the ability to influence my life and my family's life like they did 10 years ago. Sincerely, Mick Foley. And what I came to realize is that, maybe it was personal, but maybe you just can't change a closed mind. And if Ric Flair was not capable of standing in the ring with me in front of 15,000 cheering fans, if he was not capable of seeing what our storyline was generating and what it was doing for him, he was not able to see that this angle put him in an avenue where he could perform up to his fullest potential, which he definitely did at WrestleMania, then what am I going to do? What am I going to write? How great I was? If that didn't prove that I brought something to the table, nothing ever would. And so I do feel bad for him in a sense because he deserves to work a top program. And unless they bring Hulk Hogan in and do the angle with him that they could have done with me, which Vince should do as a businessman, then I don't see anyone on that roster being able to work with Flair on a pay-per-view that matters. There's no question about it. Ric Flair's a ratings draw. He's a legend, but I think it's been a long time since people have felt like they need to spend money to watch him in action.
Now, obviously you worked with Flair within the last year, well after your book came out. You mentioned after the airplane angle, he was a gentleman. How was he like at WrestleMania and, the whole Orton program? Did he pull you aside and never say anything to you?
Yeah, pulled me aside and thanked me on a couple of occasions. Told me how much, he enjoyed it. That's why it was so surprising to me. And one thing I said in the letter was, hey, you got to understand, when you tell a guy, when you're Ric Flair and you tell him, shake his hand and say it's an honor to work with you, that actually means something to anybody who's ever given a damn about the business. So when I shook his hand and said it's an honor to work with you, I meant it. And I said, maybe in the future you might want to stick to, limit your compliments to the ones you actually mean. There was never a harsh word. He was always perfect gentleman. And there was one instance where Randy, they said he was sick. I think he'd had his bell rung, and this was in Atlanta. This was the go-home week, as far as I'm concerned, where Rock was coming out. I was afraid he was going to drop the ball just because, he looked a little dazed. So I pulled Rick aside. I was like, Rick, this is a big moment, and you kind of figure out, can you be there to pick up the pieces, in case Randy's not able to. And Randy did pull it off well, but I remember being back there, and the feeling I had is, here's Ric Flair, and I think I know when someone's treating me with respect, when someone looks at you, with respect. He didn't treat me like I was a piece of garbage at all. He may think that to some degree, but I also think there is this feeling of resentment that the real legends get. And when I say real legends, I mean the guys who've proven over the time that they can draw, that they mean something, that they're top workers. And I'm including Hogan in that group, even though, athletically he wasn't on the level of a Thez and a Flair and Terry Funk. And I think the fact that some fans, and I think it's a lot of fans, because we don't in wrestling, we don't celebrate our history. We're trying to, but by and large, we ask that history be forgotten, so we can reinterpret it or invent it as we go along. And I think the fact that to a lot of wrestling fans, I'm on their level bothers them and causes them to say things that they wouldn't otherwise say. Like Hogan last year teeing off on me on the I think it's called Between the Lines, the Michael Landsberg Off the Record Landsberg show. It really shocked me, and I reacted to it poorly because I was not aware of just how brutally he buried me. And Hogan is a guy I only met a handful of times, and I'd always gotten along with, and had heard he was always complimentary towards me. And I'm trying to put myself in his shoes, and I'm thinking, he's got a book out that was underperforming. It came out at the wrong time. If it had come out around WrestleMania when he was hot, no question it would have shot up. the charts. As it was the wrong time for a Hogan book, and I'm sure that people were drawing comparisons between me and him and wondering why my book hit number one and why his was languishing. And I think that for him to realistically look at it and be like, you know, like it's just Mick Foley, how much more can I hear? And it reminds me, the reason I say it, because I remember the way I used to feel when Goldberg was really over and things hadn't quite taken off for me. And people would talk about Goldberg as being a legend, and I'm a pretty logical guy, you know, and clear-minded. And I'd hear his name, and I'd be like, Goldberg, he's no legend, you know. I'd like tee off on Goldberg. And even, you know, the story I wrote in Foley is Good about the little kid at the theme park, you know, who was a big Goldberg fan. His dad said, hey, show him your Goldberg imitation. And I turned around, you know, I leaned all forward. I think he's going to, you know, do some kind of Goldbergism. And instead the kid punched me in the nose. And they were like, good boy, Joey. And I was like, God, I hate Goldberg. You know, like, I didn't hate Goldberg. You know, when I got to know him, I liked him and got along very well with him. But if you had asked me back in '98 if we were doing this interview, you know, I would have been like, that bastard, he's no legend. And it would have made me sound like a jerk. So I'm giving Flair and Hogan the benefit of the doubt. And there's still part of me that thinks, you know what, I'm going to get a phone call from Ric Flair and he's going to tell me he was working. You know, but I'm going to do two things when I finally meet him. I've got my copy of To Be the Man there. I'm going to walk up and I'm going to ask him to sign it. And then I'm going to say exactly what I said to you guys. I said, Rick, if you treated me with just a little bit of respect, we'd be working a program right now. And I think when it's all said and done, whereas I look at that book on my shelf and I'm so proud of it because it summed up my career in 700 pages or whatever it was, that I think part of him will regret teeing off on me because maybe that book brought him a sense of closure, maybe he's going to do another one, but I honestly feel like if we were working a program that I would have gotten into the type of shape required to have a classic Ric Flair match. And I look back at the matches that I really liked of his, and I love the Steamboat matches, no question about it. But I mean the match he had with Brody, I think in '88 in St. Louis, I think it was '88. The match he had with Terry Funk in '89, New York Knockouts, and the match he had with Vader in '93, where guys were able to take Ric Flair and not take him to a new level, but take him to a different level and bring out the best in him because he would, you know, forego the routine and he would adapt to what other people did. No question, as a great worker, he was capable of adapting to different styles. And I think he and I would have done great promos, and I think we would have had a great match. And even if that match were to come off now, and I'm not saying it won't, I will say in order for it to come out, it's going to be considered pretty expensive even for a billionaire to make that happen, and I'm not sure my heart would be in it at the same time. There'd be a conflict of interest, because I'll be damned if I'm going to do a Ric Flair match. You know what I mean? And I don't think he's going to want to do a Cactus Jack match. So what you might have on your hands is a match that, as Jim Cornette might state, sucks a dick.
Before the Flair book came out and after the England comments, did you confront Flair about the England comments at all?
No, because by the time I found out, I was gone. I read about them like 4 days after the after Backlash, and the last thing I said to Flair, I mean, I said I really enjoyed getting to know you, you know, on a personal level. I was blindsided by this, no question about it. I mean, if he'd been man enough to say, when I approached him about my book, hey, listen, that bothered me, and I've got to tell you, you know, you're going to get a receipt, I would have respected that a lot more than to take the path that he chose. To shake my hand, say it was an honor to work with me, knowing full well he was going to bury me, was, in my opinion, gutless.
Okay, it's main event time for this Straight Shootin' interview. I'm going to read what Flair wrote about you.
Yeah. We're not done with Flair now? Right.
Feel free to cut me off whenever you feel like responding.
Okay.
Alright, it pretty much starts out at this point. This is the kind of shit that I was putting up with. Despite the fact that I was on the booking committee, that's why it pissed me off when Mick Foley blamed me for not recognizing his full potential during that period. In his book, Have a Nice Day, Foley wrote, quote, Ric Flair was every bit as bad on the booking side of things as he was great on the wrestling side of it. End of quotes. First of all, I'll never call myself a great booker, because wrestling always came first. But Foley took a shot at me. Here's his receipt. I'm taking a shot at him. When I first started on the booking committee, Foley was working as Cactus Jack and doing an angle where he was living in a homeless shelter. I admit it. I didn't know what to do with a 300-pound guy living in a homeless shelter.
Okay, let's stop there.
Okay.
All right. First of all, he's confusing his dates. because Ric Flair, as I mentioned, was the booker. He'd say he wasn't the booker. He was sitting on the committee. He was the head booker when I came in November of '89 until he left as booker. He stayed on as a wrestler. He left, I think, April or May of '90. And then he came back to WCW in February of '93 and became the head booker in December of '93. And I guess since he said I was in the homeless shelter when he was on the book and became part of the booking committee, I would guess that would be April of '93. So when he's talking about Jim Herd, that's actually 1990. So Ric Flair would lead you to believe the first time he ever laid eyes on this guy, he was in a homeless shelter. Okay, first of all, Ric Flair is the man who hired me in 1989. He can say he wasn't the booker, but I know when I went backstage and I met Jim Cornette and met Jim Ross, and they introduced me to Flair, when I introduced you to Rick, Rick had the ability to say yes or no, and ultimately he was the guy responsible for bringing me in, which I mentioned in Have a Nice Day, that I will always be proud of, regardless of the fact that I didn't care for him as a booker. So for him to say that he was a homeless guy, like, what am I going to do with this guy? And I find it kind of odd that here's a guy who did an angle where he was in an insane asylum criticizing a guy who was in a homeless shelter. By his standards, what if Vince McMahon had said, what am I going to do with a 50-year-old guy in an insane asylum? I mean, certainly Flair, if anybody, should have empathy for a guy who's got some ability, who's stuck in a bad angle. And I'll go out and say, yeah, sure, the homeless thing was terrible, but I was able to work my way out of that angle. And he should realize that anyone, who's got an ability to cut a promo can work himself out of any bad situation. And evidence of that is the fact that Flair has been in an insane asylum. Flair has had his head shaved by Vince Russo. He's lost Eric Bischoff. He's been buried alive, and he's still alive and well. So I would have expected a little empathy from Ric Flair on that one. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. It took P.T. Barnum in the form of Vince McMahon to take a guy whose claim to fame was his willingness to get thrown off a cage, turn him into mankind, and make him into a champion.
Hold on. I'm going to go back to the other thing just for a second. That even if Flair hadn't watched me for the 6 months I was in WCW, and even if he told me on that that date when I lost my ear in Germany, I can't remember if it was March 14th or 17th of '94, he said, I'm not really that familiar with your work as a babyface. So either A, he's lying, which is a good possibility, or B, he just is not that familiar with the talent. Because by the time he'd said that, I'd been a babyface in the same company that he was for 13 months. Now, when he was on the booking committee in April of 93, April of '93, and he became the booker in December of '93. By that time, I'd been in the company 7 or 8 months. So even if he hadn't watched a single match, and I think he had because he specifically mentioned the matches with Vader, the real brutal ones, then if you take over a team, you're a baseball manager, say, and you're not that familiar with the talent, would you go out and watch them go 0 for 4 and decide they can't hit the ball? Or would you go back and check their statistics, or would you go back and talk to people? Now, Paul Orndorff and I had done a program where I had turned babyface, and we'd had good matches. And Paul, as I mentioned in my book, went up to me and said he really appreciated the chance I gave him to get another shot, at the big time. Paul Orndorff was a very highly respected guy. He could have gone to Paul Orndorff and could have asked about me. Harley Race, he said in his book, said nobody was as respected as Harley. I said the same thing in my book. Harley Race told me the greatest compliment of my career. He said over the phone, kid, you're the new Harley Race. Certainly if he'd gone to Harley would have been able to back me up. He mentioned Sting, the respect he had for Sting. Certainly Sting, I believe, still holds me in high regard. He could have checked with Sting. He could have checked with Vader, who was the champion. So for him to pass it off like I was a homeless guy in what can I do with this homeless guy is completely ridiculous. As far as Vince, one of the guys at P.T. Barnum, I mean, to say that Vince waved a magic wand and made me the world champion is completely ridiculous. And Dave Meltzer talked about that in the Wrestling Observer, where he basically pointed out, that I wasn't supposed to be the big star when I came in. That guys like Johnny B. Bad, who came in a week after me with a huge guarantee, was supposed to be a big star. Barry Blaustein, the director of Beyond the Mat, said that when he talked to Vince about doing me, not doing me sexually, but doing me in the documentary, Vince was like, why him? And Vince did not see big dollars in me. He did mention Ahmed Johnson as a guy he saw big money in. To Vince's credit, when something was working, he went with it. And that's the exact same case to a greater degree, much greater, with Stone Cold. He didn't see Stone Cold as a big star. And I gave a story in Have a Nice Day about the guys coming up with merchandising ideas. And Stone Cold said, how about a t-shirt for Stone Cold? He said, sorry, Vince doesn't really see any merchandise potential in you. Clearly he changed his mind. So Vince went with what was working. He helped it work a lot better, but he wasn't P.T. Barnum by any stretch of the imagination.
Okay.
This is fun, though.
Foley has a cult following because of his contribution to hardcore wrestling, but hardcore is such a small part of history of this business. When I was training, falling off a ladder was not a prerequisite to making it as a professional wrestler. Being fundamentally sound was.
Let me stop you there. First off, for a long time I had a cult following, and I was very proud to have had a cult following. I remember even when I came back to WCW in the summer of '91, there was an article out, I think Pro Wrestling Illustrated, said Mick Foley cult hero or Cactus Jack cult hero, and Sting mentioned that to me, and I was proud of my cult hero status. But I don't mean this to sound the wrong way. It's kind of like when the Kinks used to be called a cult band, and then a writer said they're too popular to be a cult band. I mean, once the kids started coming on board, and once the mainstream fans did it, I kind of stopped being the cult hero. I was proud of my days as a cult hero, but I would say to call me a cult hero is, did he say hero? A cult following.
Cult following.
But to say I had a cult following would be incorrect.
I mean, I'd agree that you did have a cult following, but that's when you were wrestling Eddie Gilbert, and then once you went to the main stage, and it took on a different level.
Yeah, once you've got a sipper cup and a bobblehead doll and a Mexican mini named after you, you're kind of made. I never had the Stone Cold condoms. I never had the condom, but I don't think I'm a cult figure.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Following the heels of him saying being fundamentally sound was.
I was fundamentally sound. That's why I was able to have good matches with guys who were not brawlers. That you have to learn, be able to adapt to their style. I mean, that was a given in DiNucci school. You had to be fundamentally sound. Okay.
Occasionally, seeing the inside of a gym.
I did see the inside of lots of gyms. I was counting up. I had 17 different memberships, different gyms along the way, and I had my own gym for the last 2 years. You know what? And I said it was one of my, great, small comforts. I could go in any gym in the country and lift exactly as much as I did when I was 16 years old. I had bad genetics. I never took chemical shortcuts. And the style I had was a lot of wear and tear on my body, and I also saw no correlation between how muscular I was and how much money I made, and my performance. So I tried to be cardiovascularly well conditioned, and I would say that guys I wrestled with would say I was in surprisingly good shape. I did, no question about it, let my weight get out of hand at the end of my career. It cost me a lot of money in a couple of years, but I definitely knew the inside of a gym. Hunter even asked me to write his bodybuilding book for him when he wasn't happy about it, and I really doubt Hunter would have asked me that if he didn't think I knew a thing or two about forced reps and things of that nature.
So basically, the training you did was training suited towards you rather than trying to look like.
Yeah, but I'll say I can see why people thought I'd never seen the inside of a gym, because I certainly didn't look like I had.
Yeah.
And even when I trained for 5 months for the Backlash match, I didn't look all that much different. I lost a lot of weight, but from a perspective of deltoid development, there wasn't a whole lot going on there, and there never will be. Maybe if I chose to take the shortcuts, I might, get pimples on my back, my balls might shrink, and I might get a little stronger. But I don't think that necessarily would have made me a better force in wrestling. And I'll say that unless Ric Flair took a dip in the fountain of youth, it's somewhere along the line, and I know he admitted to taking it, but let's face it, there was a time when Rick, he wasn't looking very good, and he was even, I'm sure it hurt his feelings to, be forced, he wrestled in the shirt, And I'm not saying anything. I'm the master of the cover-up, you know. It's me and the Nasty Boys battling it out for the master of the cover-up. But I mean, there was a period where, like in 3 weeks, he was noticeably tighter, and leaner, and more muscular. And unless he can point to the fountain of youth that he dove into, I'd have to assume that once again, Ric Flair took a chemical shortcut.
Okay. When I trained under Vern Gagne, we started with 500 free squats, 250 push-ups, 250 sit-ups, and a 2-mile run over farm terrain in 0-degree weather. Then we came back to the barn to be wrestled into submission, cross-faced into submission, stretched into submission, and if Vern didn't like the way things were going, we'd start all over. He would have looked at Mick Foley on day one after Mick failed to do even one thing Vern required and said, Mick, or this is in quotes, Mick, I don't think so.
Okay. Vern Gagne might very well have said that. But I wouldn't have quit on the second day like Ric Flair did. I wouldn't have had to have had Vern Gagne come yell at me and give me an inspirational talk to get me back in the gym. You know, Dave Meltzer pointed out that maybe Vern would have said that and it would have been his loss, because part of a trainer's job is to see potential in people, and there's more than one way to gauge a person's toughness and his desire. It's not necessarily how many free squats they can do before their body fails on them. And there are wrestling trainers who out and out abuse their pupils, and if that had been me, maybe I would have decided, hey, if this is the type of people involved in sport, maybe that's not what I'm after. But to quit on the second day like Ric Flair did is not in my blood, and I think you can ask anybody who knows me, who trained with me at that time, and I'll put the sacrifices I made, such as sleeping in my car, eating the peanut butter and jelly for a week at a time, up against anything Ric Flair went through in Vern Gagne's camp.
I don't really care how many thumbtacks Mick Foley has fallen on, how many ladders he's fallen off, how many continents he's supposedly bled on. He'll always be known as a glorified stuntman.
Okay. I can kind of shed some light on that. I was in 5 matches involving thumbtacks, and I landed on thumbtacks 3 times. So that's the answer. I landed on thumbtacks 3 times. Now, there were untold thousands of thumbtacks in there. I'll give them that. Okay, you got me, you old bastard, you. But as I said, there's a time and a place for that type of thing, and Randy Orton will probably remember, or should remember, landing on the thumbtacks as the most important bump of his career. As far as the ladder matches, I had 1 ladder match. I might be off by 1. I've tried to think about how many I've had. And I've taken 3 other bumps off matches that were not ladder matches. There was the one that Undertaker, when he tipped over the ladder at SummerSlam '96. There was the match I had with Terry Funk, where I tipped over the ladder. I nearly lost my good ear. That was in Japan, August of '95. And there was the bump Billy Gunn and I took off the ladder at WrestleMania that one year. So I think, he might have, barbed wire might have been a better word to use, but that's just an example of not taking pride in your writing or not caring that your facts are right. I mean, what you should have done, and I don't know if, who was his editor at this point, if it was Mark Madden, he might have been able to say, hey, Rick, he didn't really have many ladder matches. Why don't we change that so it's factually, more correct? So I, as a person who actually cared about what I wrote, took pride in it, I don't have a lot of respect for people who can't get simple facts right.
Vern Gagne didn't fall off a ladder.
Yes, he did! Oh my goodness, Gagne must be 18, 20 feet in the air! That bald-headed bastard! Alright, let's hear it.
Dory Funk Jr. didn't fall off a ladder. Neither did Wahoo, Steamboat, or Steve Austin.
Well, Steve Austin, first of all, has fallen off a ladder. Okay, but go ahead.
Terry Funk was a great worker before he started doing that.
Okay, he was.
Kurt Angle, Shawn Michaels, and Chris Jericho can do it.
Now he starts rationalizing reasons why people did fall off ladders. I mean, that's ridiculous. Okay, he did it, but he was a great wrestler. Terry Funk was respected before he ever fell off a ladder. And I mean, Wahoo was a great wrestler. Well, my goodness, Wahoo's head looked like someone took a piece of pink saltwater taffy and stretched it across his forehead. And, you got to be careful when you criticize hardcore wrestling, because hardcore wrestling means different things to different people. in my description, which I used in the Barbie video, I said it means being able to give a little bit more for the sake of the fans. In the best sense of the word, Ric Flair is a hardcore wrestler because he has always gone above and beyond what was necessary to entertain the fans. And if his neck condition, is as bad as I heard it was, that's hardcore, going out there, taking a backdrop from me in Baltimore when going without any type of physical action would have been just fine. And I think if you take hardcore as the worst, in the worst sense of the word, as in bleeding at the drop of a hat, then I think Ric Flair should be careful who he criticizes, because it'd be different as Lou Thez leveling that criticism against the sport, which he did. But for Ric Flair and his multiple juicings in the thousands, I'd imagine, and I think he'd admit with pride that he's bled 1,000 times. I'd be careful with that criticism. If he wants to talk about garbage wrestling, yes, I did it, but I don't think that's what I was best known for. I think I was known for taking, a very physical style and portions of hardcore wrestling and bringing them into the mainstream and making them, making good matches within that context.
The way that Flair talks about, just falling off a ladder or something like that, he doesn't include, the psychology behind it. Was there ever a match where, particularly in WWE or WWF, where you came back and you were like, that was just big bumps for the sake of big bumps, or that was just, it had no meaning behind it, or do you take pride in the fact that...
I try. I've taken bumps where they weren't necessary, but then again, Flair took a backdrop in a great match a couple of weeks ago. He took a backdrop on the floor at his age, and Benoit came to get him and he put the thumb in his eye. You just took that bump for no reason whatsoever, and he went to the eyes 6 times in a row, which was not to say it wasn't a great match or his performance wasn't great, but everybody does things they for no reason other than that's what happens to come into their head, or maybe they designed it and they want that. I thought, generally speaking, I was pretty good at limiting, the useless big bumps. And in all honesty, for a few years, I really got by about talking about the big bumps, where it was 90% talk and 10% backing it up. And when I did back it up, I thought I did a pretty good job. But even in ECW, there were guys doing far more outlandish things than I was, and I was healthy in ECW. And even though I couldn't do the 500 free squats right now and the 250 push-ups, first off, if he's talking 250 in a row, I couldn't do that. I don't think he could either. But I was at a point where I could do several hundred free squats in a row and 80 push-ups, which was not bad for a broken down, washed up guy. So it wasn't all senseless bumps. There was some logic to it. And I'd go to Japan and the guys, you'd have barbed wire and thumbtacks and all that, and they'd be bleeding after taking a turnbuckle. And so not everything I did made sense, and there were times you didn't have control over what other people were going to do, and there were times you just wanted to try to salvage a decent match. I mean, it'd be, I guess, on a par with, Flair taking a bump for the referee when he was working with Rufus R. Jones and saying, hey, I'll get any reaction I can get. And there were times when I did that, where a trash can headshot was better than no reaction at all. But by and large, I don't think that's what I was best known for.
Okay. Kurt Angle, Shawn Michaels, and Chris Jericho can do it and maintain their reputations because they're...
Equivocating again. That's ridiculous. Okay, they do have great reputations. But Michaels is the master of the ladder match, and he'd be proud to say it. It's completely ridiculous. Use barbed wire as your example. Don't use a ladder match, because a lot of great wrestlers have had ladder matches.
Okay. Because they're, and in italics, already respected as athletes. And what about people who never did anything else, like the Sandman? He's no wrestler. Hardcore became a niche for a lot of guys who couldn't do fuck all in the ring.
Well, hardcore became a niche for guys who couldn't find work in a very limited environment, and ECW came along. A lot of people found their niche in that. Some people found their niche in Joel Goodhart's Tri-State Wrestling. Sandman is a guy who did have a cult following and probably be proud of it and would hate thinking that he was a mainstream guy. And he was very good at what he did. I remember him before he was he was a Sandman, but he wasn't. He was working more on a beach theme. You remember those days?
Yeah.
And he was actually a pretty good wrestler, and obviously the hardcore stuff, helped his gimmick immensely. But I think at the same time, Flair should wonder, and I don't think he wonders. I don't think he's a very introspective person. But wouldn't you say, all right, then, so if all these guys did it, why the hell is Mick Foley, like, he's the only hardcore guy that was, up there with the main players? Like, what else did he bring to the table? And if Flair had put some thought to it, I think he could have realized, but I don't think he puts thought to it. I think he's happy being Ric Flair, the great wrestler, and I don't think the concerns of the business in general or the outside world concern him a great deal.
I'm not saying that Mick Foley wasn't a star.
Yes. So what he's saying? He is saying I was a star. Okay.
That he wasn't a great attraction.
Yes, a great attraction. Yeah. All right. Okay.
But in my estimation, Mick Foley was not a great worker. He couldn't punch. He couldn't kick.
You know what? I mean, if that had been his analysis, I'm not saying he wasn't a star. He wasn't, an attraction. But in my analysis, he wasn't a great worker. I would be completely fine with that. And then I could, if he'd given me a call and said, "Hey, I want to set up a very reasonable analysis of why you were not as good as people think you are," I said, "Hold on, Rick. Next TV tape, and you and I will sit down. I'll give you a lot of reasons why I'm not as good as people think I am." But he didn't do that. And to use the can't punch and can't kick as an illustration is a little ridiculous, because there's a lot of videotape out there that would lead people to believe I could punch and I could kick. It might be, if he's basing that analysis solely on what I did in my comeback, maybe he's onto something, because I didn't have any confidence in my punches, and I was playing them safe. I did not feel like I could throw a good punch without taking somebody's head off, and so I did the best I could. But I don't even remember kicking. I remember Johnny Rod said I couldn't kick because I kicked with the left foot. And he even told all the guys when I left his gym, I came in to work out with all his guys, because if I did a good job, I might get a couple independent bookings. And Taz remembers that as soon as I left, he said, "That kid will never make it. He kicks with his left foot." So there have been two guys. Flair's in good company. Unpredictable Johnny Rod said I wouldn't make it either. Couldn't kick.
In the World Wrestling Federation, he'd spend half the day before television broadcasts sucking up to the writers because he's such a fan of himself.
It's true. Yeah. First off, believe it or not, I've been to Ric Flair's house. He hasn't been to mine. But next time to the Coliseum, when they go to the Coliseum, he'd like to come over. I'll graciously accept him. But I will say that, having been in his house and having lived in mine, that one of our houses has an awful lot of tributes to a wrestling career, and the other one doesn't. One of the houses has one painting a fan gave that other person outside an arena. That's it for wrestling. In one of the houses, the title belt he won is still in the closet gathering mold. So I'll leave it up to people's opinions, people's minds, to see which guy falls into which category. But that's ridiculous. I think most people who see me would really not claim that I was a big fan of myself, which doesn't mean I didn't believe in my abilities, because if you don't believe in your abilities, you don't make it in wrestling. But the idea of I don't know, still having to have the limousines and I think that's a ridiculous question. Less said about that, the better. But the part about sucking up to the writers is ridiculous, because I essentially was a writer. I was really lucky that I was given such free reign, and like I've said, and for those people who fast forwarded right to the Flair part, I'll just kind of reiterate that most of the ideas were mine, but a lot of the details were worked on between me, Brian Gewirtz, Michael Hayes, and ultimately Vince. And I really believed in this storyline. I mean, it was a 12-week story up until WrestleMania and 4 weeks after that. And as far as I'm concerned, it was a good story, and it got three people over better than they were before. Batista and Flair to a small degree, and Randy Orton to a great degree. It did good TV ratings, and it ultimately led to, I think, was a major reason for the big pay-per-view. I wanted this to be right. I didn't want it to be something that insulted the fans' intelligence. I wanted it to be good television, and the only way to do that is to go over the details. So yes, I did spend a lot of time with the writers, and I was one of the writers. And I said before, if I was going to be sucking up to anybody in that company, it would be Vince McMahon. It wouldn't be Brian Gewirtz. It wouldn't be telling him how great the Jenny McCarthy show was. It wouldn't be telling Michael Hayes how great Bad Street USA was. I'd go right to the big guy and kiss his ass. And I mean, this statement coming from a guy who didn't take a single stand against anybody with any semblance of power inside WWE, a brave stand against The Undertaker. He puts Undertaker over big time. My recollection of traveling with The Undertaker is The Undertaker couldn't stand Ric Flair. Flair says that one of the biggest regrets, you can look in the book, he talks about, there's a picture of Austin, he said WCW letting him go was one of their biggest mistakes. Does the Bucks ever stop with him? He was the booker. He was the man responsible for telling Austin he had to lose to the Renegade. So it was Flair who told Austin that. When Austin backed out, Austin was told, you need to go do it. Rick's going to lose a lot of respect with the boys. Now, do I think that Flair wanted Austin to lose the Renegade? No. But it was his decision. And I think he never actually takes a stand, never takes blame for anything. And I don't remember Hunter being overly fond of Rick when he left WCW. Ric Flair basically gave away the store. He let Hunter walk away. He let Austin be fired. And I know from guys who were in the booking committee, he didn't think highly of Austin. He let me walk away. Maybe he didn't think highly of me anyway. But I mean, without Hunter, without Austin, without me, I'll go out on a limb and say WWE wouldn't have fared nearly as well.
Okay. There's a difference between being a great performer and being a guy like Brutus Beefcake or the Ultimate Warrior who became famous because he happened to be working for Vince. It's the same with Foley. When he hasn't been working for Vince, there's been no demand for him whatsoever.
I don't want to curse, but I just want to say, I mean, it's one thing for Ric Flair to sit here, and criticize me as a worker, but I'll be damned if I'm going to sit in this seat and let him badmouth the good name of Brutus the Barber Beefcake. Damn you, Flair! Hasn't he been through enough, Beefcake? He's working in a subway station, really setting off a panic over cocaine disguised, anthrax disguised as cocaine, and now he's being compared to me. Is that a pretty good, believable promo? It would be, first of all, Warrior was in demand. I think Warrior, he made a killing on the independent scene, and he made a killing going back to WCW, doing that. It was a bad angle, but he got paid a lot of money, so I'd have to assume there was demand for him somewhere. But I think, honestly, if with any type of thought involved, if he had looked over his pages and said, well, what does this really mean? Is this really true? If he'd done any research into my career, he would have said, he would have realized that was really false. I think when I left WCW in 1990, I had exactly 6 months of national TV exposure, and most of that consisted of losing matches. And then I wrestled every weekend based off that 6 months for a year and a half. And Bill Apter had said to me, here's a guy who's been around forever. He goes, I've been around forever, he didn't say that, but he said, very rarely does a guy become more popular as an independent wrestler. And he felt like that was true, and I felt like it was true. And I know when I re-entered WCW, I had more confidence, I was a better worker, and the fans responded to me as if I was somebody they actually missed, that I had made a difference when I was there in WCW. When I left WCW in '94, I worked 180 dates in 1 year. That's a lot of work for an independent guy. And that includes some really, I think some good stuff in ECW, some good stuff in IWA against Terry Funk. And I'll say, this might be like sacrilege to the Flair fans, but I'll take the last decade of my career, 91 through 2000, over Ric Flair's 91 through 2000. And it might be a good argument, and if people want to fire up their VCRs or DVD players, they can feel free to. But don't just judge, the Flair versus Steamboat, which is before 91. I creatively picked the 91 number. his 89 through my 99, or 98, I'd give through him. And people, that's not a decade. Yes, it is, because the decade starts with the number 1 and ends with 0. So 91 through 2000. But I think, it's close, in 91 when he was doing the stuff with doing the angle in WWE, and when he left WCW. And another thing, just to get back to that other point, is Flair left WCW, was it June of 91? I believe, or early July, because I know I was in the crowd that day at the Baltimore Arena when everyone was chanting, "We want Flair." It was a very dark day for WCW, and they were not looking at many bright days ahead. That was the first time I met Magnum TA. I met him a couple weeks later at the Meadowlands and got a call a couple weeks after that. So when I came into WCW, they were down. And I even remarked about how Dusty just looked deflated, like he looked like a beaten man. And I do think that I came in, and along with Abdullah the Butcher, was a shot in the arm. And I think the program with me and Sting that was not supposed to mean anything actually ended up meaning a lot. And I'll go out on a limb and I'll say it meant more than the official main event program with Barry Windham and Lex Luger. I don't think people really remember that program all that fondly. But going back to my my charge, I think the stuff I did in WCW, was as good as the stuff he did in WWE. I don't think Vince would have let him out of his contract a little bit more than a year into it if Vince thought, he had main event potential. And I think, in my opinion, the stuff I did in ECW and the stuff I did in Smoky Mountain, the stuff I did in IWA was as good as the stuff Ric Flair was doing in WCW at the time, and I don't think it's even close, 96 through 2000. And I wonder, going back to what I said about resentment, I think if I was Ric Flair and I was arguably the greatest wrestler of all time, and I was getting my head shaved after losing to Vince Russo, and I was being crapped on by people who couldn't lace my boots, and then I looked over at WWE programming, and Mick Foley has a Sarah McLachlan "I Will Remember You" video, and he's being let out and being able to ride off into the sunset with a retirement match that people dream about. I can see why he'd be resentful, but once it was down on the paper, he had the ability to change it and to make it right, or at least to make it not sound so damn ignorant, and he didn't exercise that right. So if someone wants to go back and disagree with me, they can, but I think it's a good argument, and I think it's an argument that I would win with most of the fans.
Okay. Mick Foley doesn't understand what it was like to be on a booking committee. Jim Herd humiliated me and made me cut my hair after I'd won the NWA Championship 6 times. How much power did I have? When I was going through all that, how should I have been able to look at Mick Foley, push everything else aside, and mold him into a superstar?
Jim Herd made me cut my hair. And did Vince Russo make him shave his head? He has, he ultimately can say no. I don't know why he didn't. That's ridiculous. That I can understand why he didn't want to be Spartacus. It was ridiculous, but Rick, to me, like a guy who's always trying to justify his position by blaming other people. And so there comes a time when you need to look in the mirror and accept responsibility. And the fact that Flair was in lousy angle after lousy angle after lousy angle meant that he allowed himself to be the victim. And I'm saying this, he's an ultra-conservative guy. He supported Jesse Helms, probably the most hateful old bastard in the history of U.S. politics. He's about standing up and accepting responsibility. They don't want the safety net for anyone who's not doing so well in life. So I think for Ric Flair to blame everybody but himself is a little disingenuous and a little dishonest. So in conclusion, are we done with Flair?
That's the end of the passage.
All right, okay. Yeah, I'm sure if somebody, and I'm sure a lot of people will get this and go immediately to the Flair stuff. I think I've been fair to him. I will acknowledge that he was one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. I'll even say that to my face, he was a perfect gentleman and someone that I developed a fondness for. My wife, actually, she asked me one time, "So how are things going with you and Flair?" I was like, "Fine." She said, "They are?" I was like, "Yeah, I like him." The fact that I said I liked him, and while he was simultaneously, burying me behind my back, shaking hands with me, telling me what an honor it was to work with me while attempting to, pretty much destroy my legacy speaks volumes about what type of human being he was. So I will give him all the credit in the world as a wrestler. He wasn't Terry Funk, but he was close. But as a human being, I don't hold him in very high regard.
Okay. Is there anything you want to close with? Any future projects that you want to plug?
I can plug away here?
Go ahead. This is your time.
Well, the children's book is really good. I think it might not be something that fans of this show would enjoy, but I think they would enjoy it. It might be not something they would want to purchase. And the novel is out there, for anyone who wants to pick that up. I won't be hurt if you don't. But I'm really encouraged when I come back and I'm there in the audience, they're coming out down to the ring, and I hear the response, and it's as good, if not better, than it was when I was wrestling. Makes me think that I did something, and I think that the reason fans regard me as being on a level probably higher than I deserve is because I entertained them, and they felt genuine emotion. I made them laugh. In some cases, I made them think, and I may have even made them sad. But I think that what I did had a certain sense of, reality. Not reality in the sense of real versus fake, but they felt like there was genuine emotion there, and they felt like they were connecting with the guy behind the character. So I'm proud of that, and I'm proud of what I did, and it's nice to have aired my feelings and to have profited from it, as opposed to airing my feelings and having Ric Flair profit off it. Yeah.
Anything you want to close to say to the fans?
No, I don't really care about them anyway.
Thank you very much for joining us.
You got it.